Awesome. So basically what we came up with, I talked to Reexamination some, is just a 5-minute open for each person where they can kind of lay out where they stand on the with God rights, without God rights, and then after that we can basically just do an open discussion and let you guys do your thing, and I'll just moderate and ask questions here and there as we go.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Awesome. All right. Well, who wants to go first?
I mean, I can go first, and just because I wrote one down and it gives other people more time to relax, I'm probably the least relaxed person on the panel. I'm more of a high-strung kind of person, so I'll go ahead. Let me know when you're ready, and I will begin.
I'll start on you. Go ahead.
Shoot. What are rights? Tonight, I am defining rights as the moral scope of my ability to make permissions and choices with what belongs to me and what I've been entrusted with. Do rights exist? I believe the answer is a clear yes for the following reasons. In terms of universal ethics, everything begins with rights, namely the rights of the God of the Bible. In all of eternity past, before anything was created, duties were not manifest, and yet God had all power, dominion, and worthiness due to who he is. This idea is consistent with God's right to be worshipped and obeyed by his creation. The God of the Bible is the necessary precondition for rights, seeing as only he can ground all truth claims due to having attested of himself of old times in his scriptures, his undeniable impact for order and goodness in the world through Jesus Christ, he himself being relational due to his Trinitarian nature, and his saving gospel where justice is due for sin. When he made man in God's image, he prescribes the death penalty for murder in Genesis 9:6 for the very reason that man was made in God's image. This has to do with human value. To deny rights to a human is to deny their value. It has been said, there are no rights, but there are duties. However, God has no duties to anyone, only rights. Likewise, we have no rights before God, only duties. However, concerning each other, since we as human beings are made in God's image, then both rights and duties exist concerning each other as human beings. Parents have a duty to raise their children. Parents also have a right to raise their children where no superseding issue exists. This is why parents have a standing to call for justice if their kids are removed from them unjustly by another person or entity. Property rights exist, Exodus 20:15, which says thou shalt not steal. And as such, if someone were to move your fence boundaries to take more of your real estate, this is called stealing, and you have a right for justice and making things right. Rights are not merely in human minds or social construct. Every duty we have corresponds to the rights of God and often the rights of our fellow humans as well. As individuals, we have a right to life, a right to defend ourselves, and a right to not be lied against, to name a few examples. Offices of authority also have a scope of rights. Parents have authority given to them by God. Governments have authority given to them by God. The church has authority given from God. To intermeddle or overstep these boundaries without justification is an offense to the rights of the people in those positions. Some who deny rights appeal to force doctrine. Force doctrine states that, quote, there are no rights, only force, unquote. Force doctrine has been called only a descriptor when presented to secularists, but to say there are no rights is a moral claim, not merely a descriptor about power vacuums. This moral claim has to deal with rights enumerated in the Bible, such as in 1 Corinthians 9, where the Apostle Paul states that he has the right to eat and drink and take a wife. People have a right to make personal decisions about whether or not they will marry in life at all. This is a right absent of explicit duties. The only duty we have in everything, as we do as humans, is to do it for the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10:31. To my secularist friends, I would merely state that if God does not exist, then force doctrine truly is in effect. Simply put, if people give rights, people can also take them away. But no human has the right to deny fundamental equality from another human being. That is far out of the reach of mankind and safely kept in the hands of God.
Very good. Over a minute left there. Crazy. So I think the next thing we should go with death next, if she's able and willing, because it's the in-between, right? I believe Reexamination, you're yes on your answers. She's no yes on her answers, and Mo is no on his answers. So she's the perfect in-between.
With that.
Sure. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
I do have some notes.
Okay.
Let's see here. So again, I did make a video on this not that long ago. It was very long, and I understand some of this kind of stemmed from that particular video. Everybody kind of knows a lot about what I think about Force Doctrine already, and that's sort of my focus here. I don't have a specific, rather, I haven't really settled on a specific view about rights. I have this sense that they exist, but I don't necessarily. I don't really argue with people when they say like, oh well, they come from God, or if they come from a reason for instance, if we are beings who make decisions, and that's the kind of beings we are. It would be wrong for somebody to come in and start like bossing us around and things like that. So stemming from a sense of agency that humans kind of innately are owed, but none of that is really relevant because my beef is really with Force Doctrine here. So I don't really need to provide an alternate framework to point out what's wrong with Force Doctrine specifically. So that's my goal here today, and there's plenty wrong with it without even needing like an alternate framework. So I don't have any religion to sell you or anything. I'm basically like, here's this Force Doctrine thing that's been going around. And here's what's wrong with it, because it's quite a bit. So it does have this definition problem. So sometimes people who are like, oh, Force Doctrine is a thing, they define rights as basically enforcement and have this circular thing going on, and then they go, no, it's not circular, but it's super circular. I guess we'll get into it. I'm not going to harp on that too much. But even if we set the whole definition thing aside and just look at the claims, so Force Doctrine needs three things to be true at the same time. It needs men to act as a unified category, it needs physical force to be the determining factor in how rights work, and it needs women to have zero participation in enforcement. So the problem with that is Andrew Wilson, who claims to be the creator or the namer or whatever, come up with her of this Force Doctrine, he sort of debunks himself on all three, and while claiming all three to be like an argument for Force Doctrine as well. So that's my beef there. Obviously he's not here to defend himself, but I do have clips of him in my video where he did claim all those things in defense of this doctrine. And it looks like Mo here wants to take up the mental layer for him. If I'm not misunderstanding that, which might be interesting. And the biggest problem with Force Doctrine is it confuses enforcement with origin. So it keeps going on about how who particularly enforces, is it men or is it women that enforce, whatever it is. But enforcement is not the same thing as origin. And that is a big leap that is yet to be proven. So I would be interested in seeing how we sort of square that particular circle. So yeah, I don't want to harp too much. We can sort of get into it here. I do have more notes, but again, this isn't, I'm not expecting like a formal debate or anything. It's kind of a back and forth with the disagreement in it, I guess. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, so I guess then we will do Mo's opening 5 minutes. And Mo, again, you said no on both accounts, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Tell me when you're ready.
Yeah, I'll just go into it. I don't really have a very long opener, but just put something simple together. My position is a simple one. Rights are not entities floating around like the Tooth Fairy, making sure everyone gets their so-called rights. For a right to mean anything, it must actually restrict what people can do. And the only thing in the real world that can do that is enforcement. You can ground reason for rights in anything you want. It could be God, morality, philosophy, whatever you want. But unless there is a mechanism that enforces them, they remain ideas. They remain these metaphysical concepts, not realities. So the real question isn't really where rights come from. It's what actually governs behavior. And the answer, in my opinion, is very simple. It's force. Without it, rights don't exist, and they're just wishes. And fortunately, you're debating Mo tonight, so I can't speak for Andrew. I'm having a slightly different conversation with that, because I think he goes into I guess, other things that you mentioned in your video. I'm sticking mostly, unless you want to get into the other parts of Force Doctrine, what rights are and how they're applied in reality. That's it.
And you're muted, Abe.
Because of course I am.
Got to do it
Okay.
once.
Man,
So-
a few words.
Yeah, well, you know. Okay, well, with that, I suppose you guys can get into it. You can
Sure.
decide where you want to go from there.
Yeah. So
I actually, all right,
ahead.
you want to take this? Go ahead.
yeah. So Mo, I was going to ask you. So rights are not real absent of force, but then what about justice? Don't you believe that justice exists?
Justice has a force mechanism behind it.
Okay, so you would say that justice exists. So, but in the realm of God, right? You would say that hell would be justice, right?
Well, you're conflating two different things. You're conflating divine justice after death versus what we deal with in the current mortal plane that we live in.
So here's the difference I see immediately is that I put justice in a moral category, which is transcendental and immaterial, and you put justice in what seems to be a legal governmental realm. And so that's the gap
Well,
between the two of our
depends.
understandings.
Depends on what form of justice you're talking about. If you're talking about God's justice, that would be different from a government deciding what their justice is, because if a collective of people get together and decide something's just, that doesn't mean it's just in the eyes of God. So there's two different things.
Correct, but what's just in the eyes of God would necessarily be objectively just, right?
Okay, I can agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But once
that-
again, that's a post-death judgment that you're referring to. That's not what we colloquially use as far as rights go. Like my right to freedom of speech, my right to property. Essentially, our current understanding of rights, they essentially reduce down to they're all rights as we know them, especially like in the U.S. Essentially reduced down to property rights.
So that's why I defined rights as, quote, the moral scope of my ability to make permissions and choices with that which belongs to me and what I've been entrusted with. So part of that is property rights in a sense. But I just want to be careful because you wouldn't necessarily say that children are your property, and yet you have the right to be the one who raises your kids in the absence of any issue that would be large enough to supersede that, such as the need for DCFS to come in for abuse or something along those lines.
Well, you would, in that regard, there's other things going on there. You could say you have a duty, especially if you're taking the biblical approach, you have a duty to your children to raise them properly.
But you also have a right in standing to being the one who raises them uniquely compared to any other entity or person, right?
What right are you referring to?
The right to being a parent. They are your kids. They are in
What gives
entrusted-
you that right?
God.
Okay, so if DHS decides to come take your kids, you're going to say God gives me this right?
That's different because, again, I think the gap between the two of us is I'm talking about rights, not in what's legally written on some paper that can be given and taken away.
Sure.
But I'm talking
But-
about them in terms of how they exist in the moral realm.
Okay, so but even so, you can conceptually have a moral concept of a right to raise your children. But if the government comes in and says we're taking your kids, what are you going to appeal to?
If you're talking about in a purely legal sense, that's talking about a power vacuum or the differential of the ability with force. But that's not how I define rights or how I understand rights. Because even if you want to say
no, but
even if you want to say that
just
rights,
answer the question, please. Like, how are you going to? You can give me your definition. I'm giving you an example. How will you deal with that example?
well, I don't think it aptly fits what I'm talking about when it comes to rights. Nor even if rights, even in both cases, whether it's legal or moral, rights are still immaterial, whether or not somebody has force against you.
Okay, can you answer the question, the hypothetical? What happens if the government comes and takes your kids or wants to take your kids? What are you going to appeal to?
When you say appeal to, like, what do you mean?
What are you going to do? What's your next step?
Yeah, so if I have legal standing, then I would use that. If I don't have legal standing and it's a dictatorship, then they have my kids. But that's not
in the U.S. government. We're in the U.S. government.
Yeah.
They make a claim. We have a legal claim. We're going to take your kids. Are you going to appeal to your rights to not have your kids taken from you? Let's say you didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, if you're talking about in the legal system, I'd be completely dependent upon what men wrote in the legal system as far as material actions in the world that are
Right.
readily available to me. But that is totally separate than the fact that the rights were violated and outside of the law. That's where I'm coming from.
Right. And you would appeal to the legal system, your rights in the legal system in order to keep your children, correct?
Well, do you mean rights according to my definition or your definition?
Well, if you use your definition, they're probably going to laugh at you.
Okay, so that's what I want to know. When I say appeal to rights, now you're talking about what is in the law, whereas in the law of the government that I live under, as opposed to the rights I have. So, for example, if I want to make a new law, I would have to appeal to rights that exist outside of what has already been written and use something of a moral argument in order to make that the case in our new law.
Well, no, I'm not saying about making new laws or anything. I'm just, as it stands, government says we want to take your kids. You're going to appeal to some sort of rights that you have to keep your kids as a parent. You're going to fight in the legal system, and you're going to hope your rights are upheld in the government's legal structure. Are you not?
Yes, I already said that if I'm completely dependent upon only what is in the law, and I'm restricting it to rights as
Well, what
only
else would you? What else would you depend on in this scenario?
Again, that's a situation that does not describe the existence of moral rights, and that when we're talking,
it's
when we're talking
it's
about
an
legal
example
rights,
to test logic.
yeah. So you're talking about legal rights, which is different than rights as an entire dialogue, as I've described them.
Well, what you described is more conceptual rights. It's metaphysical concepts. That is not how the government, passes rights necessarily. Like the government could collectively come up tomorrow with a crazy law and say, make, you're right. You have the right to, I don't know, eat dead people or something, right? Doesn't mean it's right. It's morally right.
Yeah,
Those two separate things.
I can freely admit that I am powerless. That does not mean I am without rights on a moral level. If you want to say I'm without rights, should the government decide to, if we're defining rights as only what the government has permitted to me in its law, then I can agree that I would have no recourse. But I think that's just not relevant to the discussion of rights in general.
Well, that actually is relevant because it comes down to force.
Well, that's the thing in question. So what I'm saying is, if
I think we just demonstrated that it's a very valid thing.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, because then you just make it country dependent, and it's like, well, which country do you live in? Well, I have rights in this country and not that country. Well, then we're not talking about law anymore. We're talking about humanity, which is the whole point of rights. What when we don't define rights as what happens in the U.S. or in the jurisdiction of one particular country, we're talking about rights as far as humanity in general.
No, you're defining rights as a concept that you get them from God. And my point is that in a physical enforcement standard, that doesn't apply across the board.
I think it's
if a government doesn't
error.
agree,
That's the difference.
No, it's dead on. It's not a category error.
Totally
Explain to me how it's a category error.
Yeah, so God has rights absent of duties in and of himself.
God doesn't have rights.
God totally has rights.
No, rights imply that God needs something protected because he could be coerced into something he doesn't want to do. God is not lacking anything, doesn't need anything, and therefore he doesn't have rights. You
totally
are doing
false.
a category error with rights.
It's totally false. No, here's
I'll give you an analogy.
Okay,
I'll give you
I'll
an
listen to your
excellent analogy. Go ahead.
All right, you are importing the rights of humans and how that works in structure and structuring it on top of God. It's kind of like when people say that if you're using epistemology that's stance dependent, well, God has a mind, therefore God's epistemology is also stance dependent and therefore not objective. In the case of God, God has rights because he has the right to our worship. He has the right to ownership over us and to do with us whatever he pleases. That he doesn't to have rights is not the need to appeal to something. To have rights can be just pure ownership, which he has by dint of creating us.
Yeah. So once again, like talking about rights, you can't ascribe that to God. He's beyond rights. What God represents ultimately is the ultimate force. That's what he is. So I actually have an analogy. I'll go to this analogy, and I think I came up with an analogy yesterday that I think actually attacks both of your arguments. I'd like to hear you answer for this and get your take on it. In this analogy, it's called the asshole Superman analogy. So, asshole Superman comes to Earth. There's no kryptonite. He decides, I'm gonna take a piece of land in Tennessee, and I'm gonna settle down, have a little house, and it's gonna be great. Now he's not like the Boy Scout version of Superman. He doesn't give a shit about saving the day or anything like that. He's just left the fuck alone. That's all he wants. What rights does Superman need? Why would he need rights?
Well, because Superman's not the foundation of truth, and if Superman is either made in the image of God, or if he is made by God, then God has a right to tell him as a moral agent what to do and what his purpose is for. Therefore, as owner of the universe and the grounding of truth in which this Superman exists, he would have to appeal to God for his scope of responsibility and ownership of what he does and what he can
Superman's an
do.
atheist. He doesn't believe in God.
He still has a conscience, and God would have to exist in order to ground.
No,
the
he doesn't have
truth
a
of this
conscience. He's asshole Superman. He doesn't give a shit.
Okay, so he's not a moral agent. You're saying then he's more like an animal.
He doesn't. He's kind of just no. He's not like necessarily a bad guy, but he just doesn't give a shit.
Well,
why does he need rights?
What was the qualifier you gave before Superman? If he's not a bad guy, you gave me a descriptor. What kind of Superman is he?
He's not. You can be an asshole and not be a bad guy.
Okay, well, we'll just move past that. So
if I'm an asshole, that makes me intrinsically a bad guy.
Well, I think we're all intrinsically bad. That would include being what you said. Yes.
Okay, a bit of a dodge, but okay.
No,
so anyway, with Superman,
if you are an a-hole, you are necessarily a bad guy. Yes, I don't know what else insinuates from that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So a doctor with bad bedside manners that saves a lot of patients, he's intrinsically bad because he's an asshole.
You're conflating two different things. You're conflating his. You can be both at the same time. That one does not negate the other.
So he's not intrinsically an asshole. Thank you.
That doesn't make any sense. You can be Dr. House, who treats people like a jerk and saves people at the same time. That's not a contradiction at all.
Exactly, I agree. And he's not intrinsically a bad guy, but he's an asshole.
Okay.
Anyway,
but
going back to the Superman analogy.
Wait. So you're conflating a doctor which saves people versus a guy that goes around killing people, and that's supposed to be a corollary.
Did I say he kills people? When did I say he kills people?
What does he do? What makes him bad then? Like he's a guy who flies around.
I didn't say he was bad. You said he was bad. I just said he was kind of an asshole.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if we're being fair, can I clarify? You did say he took a piece of land, and he doesn't care. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Check.
He didn't hurt anybody. He didn't kill anybody. He just took a piece of land.
Okay.
So now
he just took a piece of land.
So now, what recourse would the government have against this Superman? What could they do to say, hey, you don't have the right to that property?
Yeah, that would be okay. So now he's a moral agent because he's stealing. He took a piece of land that didn't belong to him. He didn't have jurisdiction to do that, right?
Yeah, sure. He just took a piece of land. Yeah, it wasn't inhabited by anybody. It was just like it belonged to the government.
As an act of war.
So, what are they going to do?
Okay, that's wrong because the government obviously is an entity given rights, given authority, especially if you believe Romans 13. So
okay,
yes,
so they're going to go to him and say, "Hey, according to Romans 13, you can't have this land," and he's going to say, "Fuck off my land."
Force is separate from rights, especially if you believe rights are conceptual, because rockets aren't
not.
conceptual.
Force
rockets are real.
Rockets. Okay, so they blow his place up, and he says, "Doesn't hurt him. He's Superman."
I am
he builds it back super quick. He builds it back super quick and says, "You do that shit again, I'm going to destroy one of your missile silos."
Okay,
now
so I am again. Force you're talking about is material. The rights we're talking about are conceptual. Even you admitted earlier.
No, the rights that you. My point is rights are only conceptual unless you have force.
In both cases, they're conceptual. So when it comes to how we interact with rights, that's separate from how you enforce a right. But
can you contend with this? What exactly can they do to Superman? How can they force him to go with these so-called rights?
I think that's moving past the point of is a right offended or not when somebody takes land that doesn't belong to them. And if we're using law as a standard like we did earlier, then the answer is absolutely yes.
So what are they going to do?
Okay, so you agree that the right was offended because even at the scope of
law...
No,
I'm granting that, but what are they going to do?
Okay, so you grant, just to clarify, you grant that even in the scope of law, right was offended when he took land that belonged to the government, ergo didn't belong to him, right?
Yeah, you could say he crossed the boundary of some right, sure. But what are they
Great.
going to do?
Great. So, but you would say that, but before I move on to what they're going to do, I want to know, did anything morally wrong happen when he took that land that didn't belong to him?
According to whose morality?
God. The God of the
He
Bible
doesn't believe in God.
specifically.
He doesn't believe in God.
That's
So according to his
that's
morality,
not relevant. That's not relevant. You already,
according to his morality, he didn't do anything
you
wrong.
already included humans in this equation, and he's a moral agent because he's interacting with these on a moral level, right? They're accusing
Okay.
him of stealing.
But how are they
right?
going to?
They don't accuse
Sure.
animals of stealing if they go on private
Okay.
property.
Grant all that. They go up there and say, "Hey, you stole this shit," and he says, "Fuck off."
Right. So,
Now
so
what?
we do live in a universe which is coherent and contingent upon God's existence, right? In this hypothetical.
Sure, we can say God exists in this universe.
Great. So when he took that land, did something wrong happen morally?
I can even grant that. Yes, something morally wrong happened. Sure.
Okay. So what?
According to
what-
whatever
what-
to your standard. Yeah, I'll say your whatever standard you're going to come up with, something morally bad happened. Now what?
Okay. So then the government's right to their land was offended, absent of what was written in law.
Sure. Now what?
All right. So, okay, now that we've established that moral law exists that includes rights of entities such as people in government, we can move on to what the government's going to do. Well, in this universe where Superman always wins, then Superman wins. But the right, as you had conceded, is still offended not only in the legal realm but also in the moral realm.
Right. And so nothing happens, right?
What do you mean nothing happens? Detail that for me.
Nothing happens. They can't do anything.
I think at that point, what he's saying is the right did nothing. It was
The right is just-
a
yeah.
statement.
It's just you should do this, and he's like, "Fuck off."
I don't think
And
the
nothing
right.
happens.
I don't think the right, as in what is in the mind of God, is required to do something physically in order to exist.
Okay,
It
so
just has
you
to- it
admit
ju-
then that. So wait, so then hold on. Let's stay there then. So then you admit that the rights framework that you're putting forth is ultimately a more of anything that's just conceptual and really doesn't have force behind it necessarily.
But it has to have force behind it because it's based in God, based on my definition. So if you're talking about ultimate judgment in hell, there's force. But if you want to say that it doesn't necessarily have apparent force in this life that is spottable by human eyes, then I can grant that. But
Okay,
but
good.
to say, but that doesn't
And then
mean to
so
say
rights
they
don't exist without force.
That's like saying that if you break a law, that's like saying if you break a law in the one country and then you escape, then the law had no force because you just jumped it, and therefore even law has no force either. But in the case of God, there are actual rights that you can offend that exist regardless of whether you see it manifest in this life or not. That's what Psalm 73 is all about. He talks about all these rich people who are corrupt and they get away with all this stuff, but in the end, he saw their end with justice with God. But justice
But-
has to do with the offense of a right. Now we're
In
migrating.
even in your framework, though, we've established thus far that ultimately your framework doesn't do anything unless force is behind it, and that's why rights don't exist. Force exists. That's the only thing that governs human behavior.
Do concepts have to? When you say do anything, you're trying to say that if rights exist, then they have to be physical, or they have to have immediate physical
No.
consequence like gravity.
No.
Well, then what's the
No.
point?
No, my to restate, rights, unless they have an enforcement behind them mechanism, they are just concepts in your head. That's it.
How do you think law? Is there such a thing as an unjust law?
Sure.
By what standard?
By whatever standard whoever they're judging the morality against. Some people could say that according to their standards. Some people might say Christian standards. It depends on what a moral authority you're appealing to.
So is there in the universe that we currently live in, is there anything that is an objectively unjust law?
I can grant that. Yeah, there's sure. I can grant that.
Okay.
What's your point?
So if you have an unjust law, then you have something outside of the law itself that demands that to be corrected, correct?
You could say it demands to be correct. Yeah, you could make that statement. Sure.
Great.
But
And
how would you
right.
correct that?
again, I think the how is completely irrelevant to the existence of the rights. because-
No, it's not.
It
I think
is.
you want to dodge the how because you understand where the how goes.
No, I think you want to dodge
The
the
how
existence because
is-
you need to keep it in
No.
in the legal realm for your idea to carry
No, I'm
water.
keeping the physical realm. The physical realm. That's what we're talking about here.
Why should I believe
We
it's in
can-
the physical realm?
Because anything that you're going to do to restrict human behavior has to take a physical manifestation.
Okay, so if I speak,
some way.
if I speak, you would call that a physical manifestation.
You're using your physical mouth to make voices. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, right. So if I slander somebody, then have their rights been offended? If nothing happened to them?
Depends on if you can prove the slander.
That's in a legal realm. I'm saying if I slander somebody, would you be
Well, you're
angry
using a legal term.
if
You're using slander. That's a legal term. So are we?
Okay, so if I lie, if you want to refine it, if I lie about somebody so as to damage their reputation in public, but they still keep their job and the life goes on, but they might lose friends as a result of that. Did anything wrong happen there morally, objectively, regardless of country?
This is a very convoluted example. I'm not really sure where you're going with. Can you state this? I'm not really sure.
If I lie about you, your reputation is ruined. Did anything wrong happen?
You could say, yeah, something wrong happened. Sure.
Okay. Do you have a right to not be lied against in any realm whatsoever?
Well, no. People lie about other people all the time. You don't have a right to not be lied about.
You don't have the right to not be lied about?
What right? What is my right to not be lied about? Someone could lie about me right now and say that I'm bald.
So you would not have
dog.
So you would not have the standing to go in front of that person.
Bald.
So,
who knows?
Who knows? But you would not have the standing to go in front of that person and say, you need to correct this. You need to tell all the people that you lied about me and that what you said about me isn't true. Would you have any standing to do that?
It depends on your standing with the person. I don't understand. Like, if you're going to appeal, what are you going to appeal to? If you're taking it outside the justice system and it's just you and your buddies and someone lied about you and you approach them, you're going to have to appeal to some sort of relationship. You're going to have to appeal to something that they will grant or go along with in order to convince them to take the lie back.
Well, let's say I didn't know.
How does this have anything to do with this?
Because I am, again, rights are transcendent. They're not just in the legal realm. That's the thing. Because the fact that if anybody can do anything wrong outside of what's legal, if anybody can offend somebody or step over somebody's right outside of what is legal, then that proves my point that you have a right even outside of what men have written based on elections, referendum, and whoever's been elected to write the laws.
And who?
So you would
okay,
have.
And
so
who
you would.
Enforces that
so
right?
when I ask you, do you have standing, and you ask, well, what does that have to do with anything? It has to do with, do you have standing if somebody lies against you, smears your reputation, to go up to them and tell them you need to apologize to me and you need to tell all the people.
But that's just a moral value judgment claim. That's all that you're appealing to. If it's outside the legal system.
So what do I break when you make that moral judgment claim? What line have I crossed?
It depends on the person. Like, it depends on the situation, the context. It's a very loose analogy.
That sounds it sounds subjectivist when you put it like that. I'm talking about if it is objectively true.
Someone could be like, subjectively, they could feel like someone lied about them. Happens all the freaking time.
I'm not talking
and
about
the other person doesn't think that they lied.
In objective language here. Objectively.
So how do you prove objectively to them that they lied?
Okay, so let's say that I say that you offed your dog or something like that, and then and people think wrongly of you for that, and there's damage done, and they don't want to associate with you because they are not smart people and they don't want to look that up, and they just they think that, right?
Yeah, and then I come to you and I say, hey Rex, hey man, that was nasty. You shouldn't have said that. And you go, well, I really didn't lie because you had to put down one of your older dogs before, so it wasn't a lie. So I don't think I lied. What am I going to appeal to like? Well,
now you're just adding to the hypothetical in order to find an escape hatch. I'm talking about
my point. No, I'm not trying to. I'm going back to my original, my previous statement and previous point. If you're not in a legal system, then you're just appealing to the person's whatever morality they have to take back the lie.
You're
what
not
are you going to
engaging
appeal
the
to other than
hypothetical.
that?
You're adding to the hypothetical and changing it so as to change the narrative. I'm trying to get to a specific answer of a person being offended on a personal level, absent of what is in the law. Because would you admit that the law is not the comprehensive moral law, no matter what? By that I mean, would you agree that there are things that are allowed that are immoral that are not written down in legal code in most, if any, country?
Sure. There's all immoral laws all the time. I can grant that. I don't disagree.
Well, not only is there immoral laws, but there are things that you can do that are objectively morally wrong that are within outside of the law. For example, when a child lies to their mother, that is objectively morally wrong, correct?
Yeah, I would say lying is morally wrong. Sure.
Right, but that's
that.
not, it's not in the legal code to put tiny little handcuffs on the kid and put him to kiddie jail, right?
Sure.
Right. So there is a scope of objective moral values outside of whatever has been written in law. The question is, what has occurred that is wrong when you offend those objective moral values? I would argue that those are the rights of the person to not be either, the extreme examples would be offed, would be one, unalived, as we say on YouTube, or to be lied against. You can use the word slander, you can use the word smear, or whatever you want to use. And property rights would be among those things that are your own.
Well, we can actually go with your analogy. Let's say that there was two friends and they disagreed. One lied, the other person went up to him and said, "Hey, I think this is wrong. You shouldn't have done this." Right? If the person who lied, just in this analogy, if the person who lied refuses to take it back, would the person who was lied on have the right to disassociate with them and not make them be the friends anymore?
Yeah, I would say that absolutely. And
so they would have
justification for that.
And it would just that would be a form of force.
Even if it would be a form of force, that doesn't make it not a right. So I can agree
but
that
that's still a form of force, right?
I can agree that I am both accepting that as a form of force while also agreeing that it's a right on the occasion of what the offense is. You do
sure.
You do have,
whatever the justification you want to make for it, party A was right, party B was wrong, whatever. There's still something there that is an action to correct the wrong in some way.
Post hoc, right? Post hoc.
Post hoc, sure.
Yes, but in the moment, the right has been offended, even if post hoc there is enforcement attached to it. That's my point.
So even in this example, rights don't mean anything unless you have enforcement.
No, the only fact that you bring up enforcement is because the right has been offended in the first place.
Well, no, because the friend would only continue to be friends with them if they take it back. So because it's kind of like, hey, I'm not going to associate with you.
Because justice
I have a right to not be lied about.
Because justice is owed where right is offended, and the right has been offended when the person's been smeared.
So it comes back to force. Thank you.
So
not at all.
Can I ask?
You just admitted that.
No, not at all. The occasion for you are confusing enforcement with the existence of a right, and you've been doing this the entire time. When that's post hoc.
No.
Yeah.
So I'm actually also kind of getting confused on this point. Yeah. So absent something being granted or some level of force to give that right or to protect that right, if none of that exists, if nothing's granted, say you have a right to something and that right is not given through whatever system you're existing within and there's no force to protect that right, what does the right do at that point then?
I'm not claiming the right takes actions. I know that the rights are conceptual, but they're conceptual in the sense that they are foundational from God, from the mind of God. And that's why when God has the idea of man, creates man in the image of God, and says in Genesis 9:6, he who slays a man shall his own blood be shed, because he was made in the image of God. That's the basis from which I'm grounding this sort of thing. So even in that example, even though that person doesn't exist anymore, and the force has been applied to the victim to the point where that person is no longer on earth, justice still stands regardless of jurisdiction, regardless of law, universally in the eyes of God, even though that person cannot have any recompense.
Right, but that's where I'm having an issue. Say you live in a secular society and there is no belief in God. At what point does that do something to that system or that society? Now, you and I and Mo and plenty of others could say we believe in God, and so that makes sense to us if they agree with you. But in a secular society or in a nation that had no God or no belief in God, where would that leave them then?
Well, I mean, Romans 3:4 says, let God be true and every man a liar. So even if the entire world was secularist and did not believe in a God and did not believe that rights were real and everything was some force construct, they would still be wrong. I'm not arguing. it's incredible because I'm trying to say that force and rights are in two different realms. They're two separate things. You don't have. I admit it. They don't have to correspond to each other. In fact, that's what I'm arguing. The fact that the fact that they're not necessarily paired to each other in this life is kind of what I'm arguing, because that's why I brought up the fact that there are wrong things that you can do absent of a law or outside of a law, which still offends somebody's rights.
So the right doesn't have to grant or protect a person at all to exist.
What do you mean? Oh, what do you mean grant?
Well, if you have the right to life, for instance,
Yeah.
and you're not, that right isn't protected, do you have that right?
When you say protected, you mean protected by law?
Well, in any way. Because your life could be taken at any time by another human being, by an animal, by something else. Like, do you actually have that right, absent something, right?
Yeah,
Or-
I think you still have rights even if you die in a car accident. I don't think it follows that somebody died in a car accident, therefore they didn't have the right to life.
that would be a fair statement.
Yeah. So I would like to hear from Defnot. I haven't heard from her. Defnot, can you explain to me with a Superman analogy what exactly would be a proper way to deal with that, something like that?
Sure, that would be fun and like Superman cool. But you have already heard a lot of kind of what I think about Force Doctrine and everything, but I don't really know anything that you think about it. I don't really know what I'm arguing against here. So you did mention that your views were different from Wilson's. In what ways exactly? How do you define rights?
Well, I can restate my opening statement if you want, but what I meant by that is, I think you take issue where, you take issue with Force Doctrine in general, but the portion of Force Doctrine that men have a monopoly, I'm not really even contending with that portion of the argument right now. I'm simply contending with that rights don't exist with absent force.
Okay, so do you agree with the other two pillars that physical force determines everything, is the foundation of everything, basically? Is that something?
So I
that you would
have
agree with?
notes here. You said for Force Doctrine to work, women have to not participate and men have to act as a collective. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what was the third one? You mentioned the third one, but I missed it.
Well, he did mention the monopoly, the force foundation of everything, and men have to act as a unified category.
Monopoly for okay. So I don't think that's actually a fair representation of Force Doctrine. Force Doctrine.
Okay, well, I mean, it's what the creator said, so.
Well, no, I think that's a straw man of his argument.
Sure.
But the so force is simply now whether you collectivize with a group of people and you decide you're going to use the collective force, that's still force.
Okay, makes what? Okay, can you define rights, please? Because what are you talking about here? Because I'm still confused. Makes
Rights?
What are we making? Because we're
What do
talking
you-
about rights. What does
Yeah.
it make?
It makes in the case of rights, it's how you correct actions in humans.
Okay, I still haven't heard a definition for rights.
What kind of definition? You know what? Let's go ahead and look up the definition for rights, so we're not talking
Okay,
past each other.
no
I
problem.
actually think that's a
Um,
really good idea.
Right. A right. That which is morally correct, just, or honorable. So morally correct, just, or honorable. Now that has a few things hidden in there, because then you have to ask, what morality are you appealing to? What morality are you basing this on? What moral authority do you base this on to make this assertion?
Sure, but
But-
most people do have some sort of morality that they appeal to. So regardless of what they appeal to,
Sure.
people do seem to
I can
agree.
grant
rights
whatever
exist.
morality framework you want. So let's say in the case of the Superman analogy, like what do rights have to do with him? Why does he need rights?
Well, Superman doesn't exist, so sure, if
Oh,
there
okay.
was some.
So you don't want to deal with the analogy? I tell you what, we'll break it down then. We'll take
You
it
don't wanna
down
deal
to a
with an
tyrant.
analogy of something that is literally impossible.
It's
so
a-
why does no? I'm sorry. Why does
It's
somebody?
we can take it
why
down to a
does
tyrant.
somebody-
We'll
let me
take it down
restate
to
this.
a
I'm gonna
ruler
restate this
tyrant.
for you.
We'll take it
Why
down to
does
a ruler
somebody-
tyrant.
Why does somebody need
You don't want to go with that
rights?
analogy? That's fine. Go down to a tyrant.
Well, let me.
Are you
I'm
having
gonna-
issues
with a
let me-
tyrant
You can
too?
explain. You can make it better. Why does somebody need rights if they can literally basically do anything, right? I mean, in this
That's
scenario,
the point.
it can Superman be harmed in any way? Because
No.
most like in the real world, people can be harmed. So sure, he
Okay.
doesn't need anything. That's completely irrelevant to reality.
And-
but okay.
No, it's not irrelevant. It's so this is something that I've noticed that you do quite often. You don't understand taking an analogy to an extreme to test logic. That's a completely valid way to have an argument and test logic in that way. But if you don't
Please
want to go with that, we can go.
Enlighten me how that relates to reality in any way.
Well, test using analogies, logical analogies to test your framework is a completely fine way to test logic.
Sure. So
That's-
I'm not offering a particular framework for one, but sure, we can go into it. I mean, I'm fine sharing my opinions on things, but what I have a problem with is force doctrine specifically. So can you
Okay, what are your
explain
problems?
how this like impossible being is relates to proving somehow that force doctrine, which would be what for you exactly?
Well, logically, Superman would not require rights. They would
Okay.
be he would have no use for them, and also there would be no way to enforce rights on Superman in any way.
Okay, so logically speaking, an impossible being doesn't need rights. Okay, so what? How does that relate to?
Okay, fine. Let's take it. Let's
men
take it
give
down to a.
men give
let's
women
take it
rights
down.
specifically.
Let's-
That's the one.
I actually
But
wasn't even going to go there, but we can go there if you want. Let's take it
That's
down
my
since you don't like
priority.
that. Let's go. Let's go down to a tyrant, a king. There's been plenty of tyrant kings in history
Mm-hmm.
who have ruled with an iron fist. What they say goes. If they want someone executed, they are. What does a king in that situation? What does he need with rights? And who can enforce rights on him if he's all powerful in his current domain?
Well, everybody else. No king is like ultimately powerful like Superman. Like that's why
Oh,
the
okay.
Superman analogy was so crazy because no being like
So-
that exists. Regardless of if he's a king or if he's anybody else, no being is infinitely powerful so that they can't be harmed.
Great.
Besides Wall God, maybe if you believe in that, but that's kind of irrelevant.
Okay, let's go with that then. Okay, so you're saying that the king in this scenario is kind of a douchebag, he's kind of an asshole, like Superman.
Okay.
He doesn't really need rights, or he can't really have rights to enforce them. But you're saying that, well, if
But he
enough
still
people
does
rise up,
need rights. I mean,
How does he need
this
rights?
Need? Because that's an interesting word for this. Because like, sure, nobody really needs rights if they don't want them, but most people do want them. Like,
I think the
they're
right
not
to life is pretty
something-
important.
Sure, pretty important. But I thought you didn't think rights existed. Interesting. So what is this like?
I'm
what do
living
you mean
inside
by
your
need
framework.
here, because. Like need rights? Do they want rights? Do they like? Are they like a psychopath and they don't care what happens to them and they just want to go out there and like roar? Like sure, maybe they don't need rights then if they don't
So-
care if they die. Like okay,
Can you answer
maybe
the
they don't.
question? Why would this king need you were going something there, and I was willing to even go with that and grant it that if this king was a tyrant and enough people got sick of his shit, the people could rise up and overthrow him, correct?
Sure, his own people, people in other nations.
Sure. And
other
how would they do that?
governments.
Would they use
well,
force?
Sometimes they do. Sometimes that does happen. But usually people start with protests and things like that. So in order to rule, kings don't generally rule by pure force. That is very rare. If that does happen, it doesn't last very long in history. Whenever any particular tyrant, they need to take a hold of the institutions. They need to take a hold.
How
of
does a
people's
king rule
minds.
without force?
I'm not saying he rules without force. I'm saying he primarily does not rule via physical force.
Okay, so how
Primarily-
does he do that?
Well, I'm getting there. Primarily, they take over institutions. So, basically, for any government to exist, whether it's an evil king or like a pure democracy, which would be evil in my opinion, but for any sort of government to exist, people have to believe that it is legitimate, because you can't like at some point it becomes a numbers problem. You can't literally force everybody into submission. So people have to sort of agree on some level that this government has a right to, I suppose, rule over them in some way. And they
So the collective,
Sure, what?
the collective of people. You said the
Sure,
people.
sure.
I'm trying to
collective of
like
people.
distill your argument because you're kind of all over the place. I don't understand. Can you please like drill it down for me? Just like how does a king rule absent force? Like what
I'm not
what is the
saying absent
mechanism?
force. Why are you adding this like absent force thing?
Okay.
I'm not saying he doesn't
How-
rule with force.
Just
at
because
all.
I'm saying,
force
hold on,
is
it's not a
smaller part of
binary.
it than
It's
you
not a
think.
binary. You're misunderstanding. It's not a binary thing that I'm proposing. When I
Okay,
say
well, you
absent
keep
force, I
adding
mean no. When you're just not understanding because you're not listening. When I say absent force, I mean he would choose. I'm not going to use force to rule this particular thing that I'm handling. He still might have access to force, but how does he rule in that regard? Explain that portion to me with no force.
the institutions, courts,
What does
other
that mean?
people.
Other people.
Yes, other
Institutions?
people under him and
So
other people
he
under
wants-
them. And there's a whole
so he wants to
hierarchy of
pass a
generally
new
how people
law.
behave.
So he wants to
You
pass a
can
new
let me,
law.
Finish a sentence when you
I'm
ask a
trying to
question, because it's getting
understand.
Kind of annoying.
Well, it's annoying to me because I don't understand. You're rambling on, and I don't understand.
Why don't
Sounds like a
we
you problem.
let each person speak their whole portion and then let's respond to it because that way
Okay, go ahead.
we can get a full idea out. So
I'll try to like take notes or something. I don't know.
Great.
okay,
So, what part of the governments have to have some sort of legitimacy in the view of the people do you have a problem with?
That's a question.
Yes, it's a question. You're not
Okay,
the only one that gets
what-
to ask questions. Like, oh no.
I thought you were going to give your case and explain.
Well, I'm getting there.
Okay. So restate your question. It took me off guard. I thought you were going to actually explain something. I was going to take notes, but
Okay.
please, what's your
so
question again?
what part of the government has to govern via legitimacy? So people have to believe in this government and think it's legitimate for the government to even work at all. Do you have a problem with that?
Depends on the government structure.
Well, what kind of government can govern when the people don't think it's legitimate? Like when literally like everybody in the country is like, no, we don't think it's legitimate. That's generally when governments fall apart. I don't know of
really?
a single one that has survived that.
Are
sort
you
of
familiar with
situation.
1979 Iran?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so 1979 Iran. Before that, if you looked at the cities there, if you looked at the people, it was very much looked a lot like the American cities. Women were walking around in miniskirts. It was, kind of a more modern civilization. And then in 1979, there was a revolution where a couple thousand very violent men overthrew the government and subjected everyone because they were willing to kill and fight and use force, and no one else was. And that's where people got, they basically put women in burqas, and it's the Iran you know today.
Okay. So how does that prove force doctrine specifically? Because we do have an armed group, so we have firearms, which generally do sort of make an even playing field between the genders.
No, it doesn't.
And then here we have an armed faction. So a small faction takes over. What is it that they're taking over? Because they're not going around like literally every single person and watching them and whipping them into submission because they can't. Like there's not enough of them. They have to take over the institutions. And if the people still believe in the institutions and they can still control the people with primarily religion and the existing institutions that they took over, they can continue and run the government with that. If it was only force, they would not be able to do that.
They only use force to take over the government.
Which part, again, take over what in the government? Because the government
The government
is the
structure,
institution.
they overthrew
So they
it.
took over the institution. So the institution is still
Yeah.
what has control over the people. If they took,
And they use force to keep it.
Sure, if they used force to start to take over something, that's fine. But in order to keep it, again, the people still have to believe that this is a legitimate government. The second everybody in
No,
the
actually,
country
many
stops
people there
believing,
didn't believe in it,
isn't
and
enough. And also, they are
and also you
being,
can look at the people over there that are with the current war. A lot of people are very happy for the overthrow.
wait, would
okay.
we say that the fear of force is also still force?
Yes,
Okay, but I'm saying that it's not even those things. I'm not saying those things are irrelevant. Those things are important. They do play a role. It's just not the primary way
So-
that governments control the population.
Well, then, in the example with Iran, what did the violent couple thousand guys you use other than force to take over the government?
Well, my problem here is the take over what? Because it's not like they literally
The
went out
government.
there, like I was saying. Yeah, again, the government is an institution. So it's still an institution that has power of the people, and the people still believe in this institution. If the people stopped
Okay.
believing that this institution mattered to them at all, they wouldn't be able to do anything with it. They could take over the government with force, fine, but it wouldn't matter because the people wouldn't believe in
Okay.
it, and they'd be like,
Okay, so
bye.
okay, great. So I'll even grant that. In your scenario,
Thank you.
enough people were sick of it, and they're like, we don't want this anymore. These guys, hey man, only a couple thousand guys came here. This is bullshit. We're taking this shit. We're not putting up with this shit anymore. What are they gonna do?
They stop complying.
Is that they stop complying? So they just like lay down, or like what do you mean by that?
Well, it depends on what the situation is. Like, what are they being forced to do that they're not happy with?
Well, they just have a government structure and they're tyrannical. They
They stop
whatever
listening
agreements
to
you
whatever
want
the
to come up
government says. If the government says pay taxes, they just don't pay taxes.
with. Okay, so would that be some sort of correction, some sort of force mechanism?
Not paying taxes?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely not any kind of physical force. Not doing something isn't really
Physical
like,
force is not
I
just
don't
physical.
see how that.
Force not. I think this is also a thing that you get wrong a lot. Is you think that force only is like a big dude with a club and me club you, me
Oh,
me,
no,
me
that's-
take everything.
I literally
It's
don't.
not
I
the
argue
case.
against that. I don't know if you've seen like all of the Force Doctrine
No,
videos,
no.
but in some of the
I-
older
I'm not
ones,
saying you
that's
don't argue against
specifically-
that. I'm saying that you
saying
conflate the
that is
two.
what I do argue against. I don't know if you've seen my older videos, but that I literally make that an exact point, and I literally use dude with the club as an example. This is crazy, but that is my point actually. That it's not like enforcement in general isn't only physical force. Therefore, both
it's
genders
force.
are capable of it.
But it's force.
So, sure. Can we define
Okay.
force here? Because my problem isn't with like enforcement in general. Because like it is my argument, enforcement can be done in many ways that isn't physical. Or
I would
even-
say
even
force.
fear
I would
of
define it as
physical.
a mechanism that compels or restrains behavior.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like it's physical to me. So how
It can
how is
be.
that something that
Restrained behavior can definitely be
No,
physical.
it can be, but I'm saying it's not necessarily physical by your definition. So how
it's not.
exactly does that? Okay, I agree. How exactly does that keep women from enforcing? If that is your definition, women can enforce
Well,
just fine
you-
with all kinds of social.
Well,
pressure and
okay.
everything.
You seem to really want to go into the gender monolith of force, so I can appease that for a moment. So ultimately, when we're discussing force, and you agree to the definition of mechanism that compels or restrains behavior, you think that's correct?
Sorry, what?
Can you agree that a good definition of force is any mechanism that compels or restrains behavior?
It depends on what we're talking about. So I think for like specifically my arguments against force doctrine is specifically defined by the creator as physical force or fear of physical force. So that is specifically what I have beef
Okay.
with. If you define force in some other way that includes like social pressure and things like that is actually my argument. So I'm actually all for that. I don't have an issue with that.
Okay, so when it comes to force, with the definition that I'm kind of working with here, ultimately,
So it doesn't have
let's
to
say
be
you have
physical, just to be clear, right?
force is not always physical, no. But also once again, even you keep saying the creator, Andrew, he's even said such. So he's even made arguments around that.
I'd love
But
to see that.
anyway, when it comes to force, especially when we're talking around rights and laws, ultimately men do have a monopoly on force. They are stronger. I think women only have, in a best case scenario, up to like 60% grip strength of men. So when you have a group of men, as the case we saw with Iran in 1979, a couple thousand men, and they're willing to use violence, it's far more effective than writing a letter or any other thing that you're going to do that a woman's going to do. A woman does not have the capability that a man has. So when we're talking on the raw, brutal nature of force, men do have a monopoly on it. And if men want to collectivize, like we saw in Iran, and do something, There's not a damn thing any woman can do about it.
Okay, I have several problems with this particular thing. So, this monopoly on force, you saw the video, so I'm confused why you're bringing this up because.
Well, it doesn't mean I
don't
agree with it
have-
even if I saw it.
Right, because I'm confused because I've already talked about this point. Men don't have a monopoly on force. So if women do participate in like up to I think like 15% or something as far as cops go and military and other physical enforcement mechanisms, how do men have a monopoly on anything?
Because if you were to take all those women, let's say whatever number it is, let's say it's 1,000 women, and put them up against 1,000 men, they wouldn't stand a chance in hell.
But that has nothing to do with the reality today. So men,
No, that is
men
reality.
don't have
That was the reality for Iran.
Okay, men don't have a monopoly on force, and we can kind of get past this and get to the Iran.
Well, no,
thing.
I'd like to actually dissect this. What is your reason that men don't have a monopoly on force? Because I think this is important.
I just told you because if men are
No, you didn't.
generally like most of the enforcement mechanism, most isn't enough for monopoly. Monopoly has to be exclusively one thing.
No,
You can't have
when
50%
I say-
of women doing the physical
no.
enforcement. It's
When
not
I
ifs,
say-
ands, and buts, and coulds and couldn'ts.
Okay,
I'm talking
okay, hold
about
on.
reality here.
I'm talking about reality. I think you're living in like Hollywood fantasy film where women can take on men. But anyway, going
That's
into
not- okay,
this,
No, I'm sorry.
into this
let's be clear.
scenario.
I don't have any kind of fantasy that women can physically fight out men. I
Great.
100% agree that men are stronger on average than women. That is
Great.
not at any point that has never been debated. So please don't try
Great.
to what is it?
Okay,
strawman.
well then I'm glad you clarified, and this makes this even easier. So when we say men have a monopoly on force, you can say that, well, we have a police force and the majority is men, and then there's some women there. Great, that's fine. But that's not what we're referring to. There's two separate things. We're referring to the physical raw strength of men versus women and how that performs when enacting force, as once again we saw in Iran.
Okay, but I thought we just agreed that force wasn't only physical strength, that there is more to enforcement than the physical strength or fear thereof. We just agreed on that. So if we're talking about a different kind of force now where we're limiting to physical things, I would like that noted so that we can sort of shift to that discussion, because that is a different conversation.
So I think what's being missed here is that if we go bare bones, right? Yes, currently force can be used in social pressure. It can be used in the fear of force, right? But I think what he was saying earlier is in a collectivized manner, if you wiped that away and you went straight to bare bones and social pressure didn't matter anymore, and there was a collectivization of males who said, we're going to rise up and take the power, any power and all power out of the hands of the female persuasion, there's nothing that could be done by the female persuasion to stop it.
Okay,
Correct.
I don't want to even entertain this because of how ridiculous it is, but I'll get there. So bear with me for a second. Men aren't a collective of any sort. That is not how collectives work. There's no such thing as a male collective. Even this thing in Iran or whatever other nation you want to pick, or even at any point in history, it's not been men versus women. It's maybe some specific set of men who mostly collectivize because they share beliefs or they share race or they share some other religion or something like that. That is what brings a collective together of human beings. Human beings don't function in this whole gendered men versus women and now they're at war thing. This is a complete fantasy. I don't know why this keeps coming up because this is not something that happens. Even in cases where women are oppressed, that generally happens through other women as well. There's other women oppressing them, and there's men on both sides of these things. There's also different races being oppressed, and there's the same race on each side of these things. It's just because some particular section of some particular country, some gender is oppressed there, it doesn't mean that it's exclusively men oppressing exclusively women. Even in the
men,
everybody's favorite example,
I'll
let you talk,
they do it to men too.
Exactly. So it's not men versus women. It's like an angry mob
Well,
of crazed people versus a whole society. So
I
we
think
have
the
a
problem
category
here-
error here because if it
No,
was
it's not a category
men
error.
versus
I think you're-
women, It
I
would
think
be
you're.
different.
Let
right?
me clarify. Let me clarify.
Go ahead.
I think what you're doing is you're taking the descriptor claim of reality and then attributing it to some sort of like gender war that we're saying is going on. That's
Well,
not the case.
that's what your could thing is, isn't it? Because every time you say, well, men
You could.
that's what you're saying. Men could collectivize and get
It's a
all the men
descriptor claim,
together
yes.
and go against all the women. That implies men on one side, women on the other. Where am I wrong
Right.
with that?
So
That's what you're
But
saying.
you're implying that that's what is the case in all scenarios, and this, or something to that nature.
No,
I'm saying
implying
that.
your hypothetical has no basis in reality. That's not how people work.
Well, no, the hypothetical is used once again. Hypotheticals are important to prove logical reasoning around what could happen and what the world we live in is, right?
I
The
don't
reality
disagree,
of it.
but they also have to relate to reality in some way. So,
Well, I would say it
if
was
I
very
say
much
that
related
aliens
to
are
the
gonna come
Iran
down
1979
tomorrow
reality.
and put things in everybody's butts, it's not some. I'm not saying that
So-
aliens grant us rights. Okay.
So in the 1979
crazy,
situation
right?
in Iran, do you think there was like women with the men going there to charge and take over, or do you think it was just all men?
It's not really relevant in this particular
How is that
case.
not relevant?
Well, I'm getting there. It's not really relevant whether it was like specifically men doing it or specifically women doing it, because again, it's this. I think we've already been through this, but this is a specific group, and it's not because they're like, okay, we're all men, let's get together and as men go and take over this thing that's a woman thing. Okay, that is not what happened. It was their. I would love to look into the history, so I don't want to talk out of turn here, but I pretty much guarantee if I look up any example you give, it's going to be, okay, we are a collective of people who have some belief, whether it's religious or political or whatever, and we're going to go after these other people that have some other opposite political or religious belief, and they're not collectivizing themselves based on their gender.
Okay, well,
I guarantee
I can even partially grant that, right? Let's say that, yeah, they got behind some ideology, whatever, right? They decided that they were going to go with, a religion, a collective movement, whatever thing you want to say it is. At the end of the day, the force that showed up to overthrow the government was a couple thousand men.
Okay, and they probably had uniforms too, and they probably had guns too. So okay, there's a lot
Sure.
of there's a lot of attributes
What does that
that
have to do
they
with it?
probably could have.
But
been.
can you agree that that was the case? Like that's
Sure,
what they
in this
did?
particular case, sure, probably, but maybe they also had
Okay,
short hair
so
and
why-
turbans. So is it that people
why
with
didn't they
turbans
show
granted
up-
people rights?
So why didn't they try to show up with, I don't know, a mixture of women if it's all the same, and then they can apparently, you said earlier that guns or women can use guns too. Why didn't they bring a bunch of women with them?
I don't know why these particular men didn't. I know that there have been uprisings and takeovers where they did bring women, and some that women have even led, as I've been informed recently. But that's
No.
not that has nothing to do with my point. My point
E-
is that
even
they're
if-
not
even
getting
if you
together
can-
as men, and there's other. You could say, oh, sure, we can even in this particular case that I'm not informed about. I'd love to look it up and be like more informed on exactly what we're discussing here. But even in this particular case, if you say they're all men, I completely believe you. But they
Right.
were also probably all wearing turbans, and maybe they also had short hair, and maybe they all had guns. So do we say?
Well,
that
I don't
people
think a
with
turban
guns
gives an
give us
extra
rights?
force multiplier, but
Well, do people with guns then grant us rights? Do people with short hair grant us rights because they also probably had? Well, in this case, probably not.
people with guns, yes, do grant you your rights, yes, in the U.S.
Okay, so women do also have guns. So in the U.S., women grant you rights. Thank you. I agree.
No. The women, well, you can straw man if you want. No, ultimately,
straw
it's
man,
going to be
this is
men.
what you just said. You said people
No,
with
I
guns
said
do grant you
people with
rights.
guns.
Women also
I didn't
have
specify.
guns.
I didn't specify like what people. Ultimately, it's going to
Okay,
be like
special
men who
treatment.
enforce rights.
Okay, you're just stating that after already agreeing that people with guns grant rights, and when I
Or men
point out the
people,
reality
or
that
men
women
people,
also have
Or
guns,
men people.
people
you.
in
Okay.
general is what
Okay.
you said.
Okay. Men or
So
people?
if
No, I
people
didn't say
with
that.
guns
No, I didn't.
specifically-
I didn't say that.
Okay, you can
I didn't
try
say
to back out of
people
this
in
if you
general.
want, but it looks
Roll
super
it back.
bad for you.
Roll it
But
back
that's
if you
fine.
want. I didn't say people in general. I said people with guns grant rights. That was my statement.
again, the
But if you
guns
wanna roll it
being
back,
the
you're gonna
key
look really
term here,
silly.
right? So it's the gun that is supposedly the rights grantor in your case. So
No.
women also can bear guns
No.
and do all the time. So then women with guns grant you rights by
No.
your definition here.
No.
Okay, I mean you can say no.
Women don't
and
even
make
grant
whatever special
themselves-
case you
women-
want, but
women
you
didn't
just
e- did
agreed to this
women-
over and over again.
Did women give themselves the right to vote?
What do you mean give themselves? Let's see. Again, I would love to get into the specific cases. If I could look them up, that'd be so great. But specifically with the right to vote, I know that there has been marching and there has been
Mhm.
basically like anybody else that has gotten rights. Usually it has been through a mass sort of civil disobedience as well as some violent struggle here and there. But overall, this is a political thing. So it was basically making it so costly for the politicians to not support it that it was too costly for them to not do
No,
it.
no,
So
actually, no. That's not actually
it's a
historically
cost
correct.
benefit. Cost
Historically, it's
benefit
not
sort of
correct. It was actually a
situation.
very small minority of even women who actually wanted the right to vote. In fact, they actually
Okay,
put
so
they
it's-
put it up to. Let me finish.
Go
They
ahead.
put it up to a vote in California, even in California, and it was voted down by women because they made a special case. Hey, we're going to let you vote on this. Do you want the right to vote? And they said no.
Okay, so some specific people didn't want the right to vote, especially like women. I don't
No,
know how you
women.
think that this
Women
helps
did
your
want the
point,
right to
because
vote.
even in this situation,
No. My point is
No,
who
I'm sorry, let me finish, 'cause
essentially
I let you
voted
finish.
in. Who essentially
gonna-
voted
okay.
in the right to vote?
what
Was
I
it
was
men or
saying
women?
earlier, before you so rudely interrupted when I was trying to answer your question. So in this particular situation, you're saying that if I were to grant you, because again, I'm not informed on this particular vote or whatever you're discussing. If I were to
Women's
grant
suffrage.
that most of the women for some reason didn't want the right to vote, which is totally possible. I think I do also cover this in the video, by the way. But that kind of goes to my point even more. So it's not men against women. It's if women were to all suddenly be like, yes, we need rights now or else, that might have happened faster or differently or something. But because they didn't even want them and got them, that only shows how like either the ones that didn't want it, how much more power they had, or how this isn't really an example of anything at all because
No, I can explain. It's
Go
an
ahead.
example of men voting and saying yes, let's give them the right to vote.
Okay.
So
people
They
voted.
got their right through
What does
men.
this have to do with them being
They got their vo-
stronger?
they got
Because,
their right
again,
to-
voted here.
Oh, wait. You let's go back one claim at a time. You said
Okay.
that women give rights. I brought up the right to vote for
I'm not
women.
saying- I'm s-
I
no,
explained.
No.
I
I'm sorry,
explained.
I have to
I
correct you. I'm
explained
not saying
that
women give rights. I don't think people.
you just
give
said women give
rights.
rights. You
No,
said
I'm
that
saying,
verbatim earlier.
Do you know what an internal critique is, sir? Because that's what that was. That's what I'm doing. You said that people with guns give rights. So I specifically said, in your worldview, according to you, women give rights. That
I
has nothing
said
to do with
I
me
didn't say
thinking-
women give rights with guns. So
No, you said
you can
people
you can
with
do an
guns.
internal you can do an internal critique if you want, but if it's on a straw
I
man
have already
argument, it
done
means nothing.
what do you mean if I want? I've already done it. It's in the past. I've already done it. It's happened.
Yeah,
You said
wrongly with a
people
straw
with
man the
guns.
straw man argument.
I said that women are also people, and therefore, in your view, women give you rights then.
No.
Anyway, I don't
So
think
anyway,
people give
going
each
back to
other
no,
rights.
let's not run from this. Let's
If
not
I could
let's not run
clarify,
from this.
people
Let's not
don't
run from
give
this.
rights.
Let's
I
not
think
run from
rights
this.
are
Hold on.
inherent, and that's completely irrelevant as to whether men specifically give women rights. I don't
So
think
did
women
men
give
vote
rights.
to give women rights
Just
ultimately
like
in
men
the end?
don't. It's society in general. You don't get
Not
like,
gonna answer the question.
one
Let-
gender
let-
versus
Yeah,
another
yeah,
gender.
I
absolutely
think
not
it was
answering
a jump
questions.
ball.
No, she is. No, she is. She's saying she believes that they're inherent and that society as a whole gives the rights.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to. I appreciate that.
Okay, but in the situation with women's suffrage, men were the one that voted in the right for women to vote.
Voted, but again, voting isn't like a physical force situation. So just because something happened in one particular case where
it
they
has
happen
a
to be
force of
men,
entailment.
that doesn't
Yes.
mean that like women somehow can't participate in
Well,
government.
hold on. Let's stick
because
with
we
that
see
then.
them doing it.
Okay, let's stick with that then. If a collective of people vote on a new law and they pass it,
Okay.
that law is going to have an enforcement behind it, is it not?
Yeah, generally it's police and things like
Okay.
that. Sure.
So rights only exist with force. Thank you.
No, the rights still exist. What do you call it? Like, what is this like? How do you violate a right then? Because if what you're saying is true, it's impossible to violate a right. Yet we have language for this concept of violating. How do you violate something if the simply removal of it makes it go away?
Well, you're just picking a portion of the framework and the outcome.
Well, can you just explain how you violate something?
Yeah, I'm getting to it. Okay. If you have a right to property and then someone steals that property, then the enforcement arm of the government comes in and says, you're not fucking allowed to do that, and they give you your property back.
Okay, so that's
you don't have this you don't have this situation where you walk around and you have some invisible barrier that gives you your rights and protects you from everything. All the correction is pretty much done post hoc.
I don't have a problem with that. And again,
okay.
Sure, there are some examples where if a right is violated, the recourse for that would be force. I'm not arguing against that. But again, enforcement is police, and women do participate in that. So this is not a monopoly on enforcement, for one. And
you're misunderstanding the monopoly thing.
Okay, go ahead again.
You're misunderstanding monopoly. Once again, when we say men have a monopoly on force, it's just a descriptor claim that men, and you already granted this, are physically stronger than women. And as we see in real world examples, in the case with Iran, if enough men decide to do something and they're violent, they can do it, and there's not much anyone can do with it if there's enough of them. So going back to this right situation, there's always going to be an enforcement arm to make the right real. Like, rights don't exist without an enforcement arm.
Okay, but we just agreed that enforcement and force is not only physical. If it's not only physical, women can participate in this enforcement. So this whole only men enforce falls apart right there.
So wait, are we sticking to only Western values, or if it is the case that we stripped away Western values or the system that we have now, does that still hold?
Which part?
What you're saying now. Yes, we know that social has force. We know all of those things. But if you stripped away all of the great that we have built to make that the case, does it still function the same way? If there isn't a society that upholds rights and values and everything else, does it still exist in the way that you're stating currently?
I do think that enforcement still involves the entire society, and it's not only men enforcing. Again, because as we agreed, enforcement is not only physical. And even in societies where things are not as great as we have it here, where even when women are forced to wear the headpiece or whatever situation, right? We can say okay, well, maybe they don't have the right to show their hair or something. It's not that men are literally sitting there with guns or whatever, without guns, with fists, with bats, whatever you have going on, and literally being if you don't, you will get beat, because I'm sure that does happen on individual cases. But overall, all of them is mostly enforced via other older women and their religion. So it's you have force as one of a piece of enforcement, but it's not unique to men, because women do still enforce like the older women do, and women pass down religion and traditions to their children, and because they have this religious tradition that they all uphold together, that sort of strengthens everything else. And so when they have outliers that are F this religion, I don't care, and they have to use force for that situation, that is a small percentage of people when you have control of these institutions and the traditions and the religion.
Yeah, and that's similar to Def not
I think the problem
well.
here is you consistently when someone says that men have a monopoly on force, a descriptive claim of just the raw nature of men versus women, you even granted that men are stronger. That is not necessarily attached to rights only exist with force. You can say all you want, but it's two separate claims. Rights only exist in force. Sure, you can say that in that collective there will be women to some degree, but at the end of the day, a right only has any meaning if it can be enforced. That's a separate claim than that just a descriptor of men. And I think you combine the two, and that's why when I started this, I wasn't even going to go down the monopoly of men in force, because honestly, it's not even currently relevant to the argument that I'm making about rights and needing force to actually be anything that's real that we can use.
Well, force doctrine says that men specifically grant women rights. That's what my beef is with, as you know. So if you wanted to argue against that, that's what you're arguing.
No, I'm not going to argue
here.
against that.
And part
No.
of. So you don't think that men grant women rights? What are we here
when you
for?
reduce it,
That's my whole
when you
thing.
reduce it down to it, yes, rights. When you reduce it down to it, ultimately, when it comes down to it, sure, but men do grant everyone rights. Men grant me rights. I'm a man.
Okay.
Other men grant me the rights, right? But
So what are
that's
they
a
granting if
that's a
they don't exist?
reductio. They're enforcing. They're using force.
So rights are only force. You do agree with that then?
Yes.
And
Yes. Rights are
force
only force.
is not only physical, therefore women can also enforce rights and do. So how
Not
does
by
that
themselves.
square for you? Because if we agreed that force is not only physical or fear thereof, then women can also participate in the enforcement, and now you don't have a monopoly
They
on
can
force at all.
participate. They
So
can
it's not
participate.
sorry. Let me finish. So it's not any
Okay,
kind of
there it is.
monopoly on force, because, as we agreed, force isn't only physical. So what is this monopoly situation that we keep coming back to? Like you say, you don't want to argue with with that on that particular point, and I can see why, because it doesn't make
Oh
sense.
no, I can't. I'm
with the rest
comfortable
of
with
the
it.
belief.
No, it's just not. It's not part of my argument.
Well, it's
I
not
have no problem with
descriptively
it.
true that men have a monopoly on force.
Yes, it is. You
Because
agree,
we
men are
just
stronger.
agreed that force isn't only physical, and even if it was only physical, they still don't have a monopoly on it because of the 15 or so percent I mentioned before.
Let me
Monopoly would be,
clarify.
but
Men
like
have
100%.
men have a monopoly on physical force. Is that better?
No, because still the 15% that I mentioned, that also.
Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. Once again, you already
I mean,
agreed
you
that
can
men.
sort of special plead your way into like
Well, let me.
waving things
No,
away
I'm
that
not.
don't
I'm
mean
not.
anything.
I'll address it. I'll address it. Let me speak.
Okay, go ahead.
Even if you, once again, if you take that 15% and you removed it, you'd still have a police force. And if all the men said, hey, we don't want you fucking around here anymore, get out of here, there's nothing the women can do about it. That's why it reduces down to men have a
monopoly. There's quite a bit of
monopoly on
recourse
force.
that women have in general. First of all, they are like valued members of a society. If all the women literally like woke up tomorrow and were like, okay, I'm gonna like poison my husband or whatever, goodbye men. Like what
No.
there's a lot of things that people could
wait.
do in general that, like, if I sneak up on your house and burn it down, I'm not like giving you a right to your house. That's not how things work. Just because somebody could in theory do something, that doesn't mean that they grant you the right to like have that thing because they're not doing it to you. That's so ridiculous.
That would not go over well. If every woman decided to do that, and you might get a few guys, but eventually it wouldn't even be a challenge. Like it would be done with like within a few days. Like the men would realize, okay, all these women are being fucking crazy. We're gonna lock them up.
Realize they'll all be dead.
No, they wouldn't. You're assuming a 100% success rate. You think they're all gonna be
100% success rate of this? Like, if it's men, for some reason they can do anything they want. But
You already
women can't,
granted
like,
men are
sneak up
stronger,
on anybody.
vastly stronger.
The society that you are describing is men literally standing over everybody else with a gun and being like, do this or else.
2,000 or 3,000 men took over entire government.
Again, the government is an institution. That's not like a men thing.
And they controlled it.
We have it over and over and over again. You keep making this particular category error where you say,
No, it's not a category.
Okay, hold on. Let me highlight.
Sorry,
Let me highlight something, because I cited Romans 13 earlier, and Romans 13. I'm going to read verses 4 and 5. It's talking about the government. You can fact check me on it if you doubt me. But verse 4 says, "For he," meaning that which is in a government position, "is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil." Right. So not that with breaketh the law, but doeth evil. But Romans 13:5 says, "Wherever ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake." So you have two categories here that both pertain to justice itself, both inside and outside the law, not just because of the physical consequences, but also for what is intrinsically, universally, and transcendently wrong and a violation against people. So how would you tackle that, Mo? Because I think that's what she's getting at, is a distinction between a right being violated in the abstract and the post hoc discretionary use of force by the powers that be.
I would say that what good would that, if you would take that, what you just said, and stop the guys that are taking over Iran and say, hey, this thing.
I'm talking about the conscience.
What good would
part.
that do?
I'm talking about the conscience sake part, because obviously we still are struck in our conscience when we do something wrong. So I can agree that when people use force, they get their way, and when people don't use force, they don't get their way. I'm talking about the conscience part. We're already past the part that force works in order to get a physical end, but that has nothing to do with being accountable in your conscience. That's different than the written laws of men in government.
So what can you like distill this down to like a question? I don't really understand what you're asking me.
Yeah. So how do you differentiate between being afraid of the government, not just for wrath, but for conscience, if it all boils down to force?
How do I differentiate between the government? Say that again.
So how do you differentiate between the government in terms of the respect you give it, if its moral place in society before God? If there's only force, why does Scripture say not to be subject to it only for wrath, but also for conscience sake? Because conscience is not written in the legal system. Conscience is written on our hearts.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have.
I'm not really.
Yeah. So how do you?
I guess I'm not understanding. I'm still not understanding really. Can you give it? I don't know.
Yeah. So how does
how
does that fit in your paradigm? How does conscience fit in your paradigm if we're supposed to be fearful for the government, not just for wrath's sake, but also for conscience? As if there's something outside the legal system that compels us, not by physical limitations, but by moral restraint, based on our responsibility to God to follow the government.
Well, I would say you have duties, responsibility to God as a moral being to act a certain way. Now, whether I can collectivize with enough other Christians to have the force in order to enact that is another thing.
Has effects. I already agree with you that force has effects. But what I'm saying is government has a right in its role in our life, because it already says that God gave government the sword. So that's within its jurisdiction to use the sword in those means. So,
I see.
So I agree that force works, but I'm saying for the conscience sake part, that means that government has a right in your life to govern you and to oversee the affairs of men.
Right. So you're essentially let me see if I can like distill this down to the question. You're asking me when it comes to, let's say, a government that has, like, let's say, an immoral law. I have a moral conscience that if that goes against it, how do I trust the government, or do I trust the moral law of God?
I'm saying not only should you fear it, like the passage says, because of the physical consequences of force, but also because it in itself is intrinsically wrong to go against the government where God's law is not being superseded. Or, so if it doesn't conflict with God's demand in your life, if it doesn't force you to sin, your conscience should be struck if you go against the powers that be in the law.
Sure, I can grant that.
Okay, so then outside of the written laws of men, there are laws that are constraining that have nothing to do with physical consequences.
Like what?
Like God's law of obeying the government.
God's law of obeying the government.
Correct.
But we just established that if you have let's say the government has an immoral law,
that would just be a question of what supersedes what, not a question of whether the government has rights and a scope of power. So, for example, like if I can say I have the right to life in the sense that I have the right to not be murdered, but it's not an absolute right. Just because something's not absolute doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So if I kill somebody, then if I unalive somebody, sorry YouTube, but if I unalive somebody, then I forfeit that in a sense of like, now the justice that is required due to the circumstance requires that I would be put down. Now, some people disagree with that, but just for the sake of argument, let's just say that Genesis 9:6 is in effect. That because I have unalived somebody, now therefore I have earned the punishment to have my life taken away from me by the powers that be, right? But that doesn't mean that therefore, because there is this exception of superseding, that the right to life doesn't exist, because otherwise then the charge of murder would make no sense, because then the person wouldn't have a right to live. And if the person didn't have a right to live, they don't have value. If they don't have value, then unaliving them wouldn't be wrong.
Okay, but in your scenario, there's still force at play.
I
Correct.
already granted that. I
Yep.
already granted
Right.
that force happens, and force has physical effects in the physical world. I'm talking about
Okay.
what it talks about conscience sake.
Conscious sake.
Right.
So, yeah,
where
if
there is no
consciously-
physical oh my conscience, a brick hit my head because
Sure.
I treated somebody bad. But if you say you've seen the movie Office Space, right? Where they incrementally steal fractions of a penny over time in order to get money from the company.
Right.
Right. So part of that had to do with the mounting actual offenses they did in a legal sense that could be proven or kept track of. Also, part of that would have to do with the weight on your conscience as a human being made in the image of God that knows deep down what they're doing is wrong because it doesn't belong to them. It's not their property, regardless of what government they're under. So when you fear the government, you don't fear it just because they can kill you. You fear it also because you are made and subject to them and the providence of God relative to the country you're in. Now, Def Not, I know you disagree
how
with
does this have to? How does this have to? Explain to me how this has to do with rights don't exist.
Yes,
force.
because rights is a moral claim. Whenever you want to make a law into court, you use.
How is rights? Can you explain that to me? What
Yes.
do you mean by moral
Let's
claim?
say I wanted to make a law that it was like a new right, right? I would use moral arguments.
Right. And who by what moral authority are you applying?
Yeah, that would be the God of the Bible. But I would, regardless of which moral authority, let's say it was even a fake one, I would still use moral arguments in order to make a new law concerning rights for human beings.
So if in that structure, then if it's not the God of the Bible, if it's some other moral authority, what's to say that whatever right you create is actually not moral?
Like I said, I'll grant that. I'll grant whatever. We'll use even like Planet Peterson as an example of Spanky. I'd still be using a moral law, even if it's an unjust.
Not familiar with that, but I'll go
fine.
with it.
Eli Nix is. But if I use the most ridiculous example, I'm going to submit my idea for a law that confers rights to a moral standard, even if it's an unjustified moral standard. We're not using math, we're not using science, we're using moral transcendent law, so that our laws that we create recognize the transcendent laws of morals that already exist. That's why we can have such a thing as just laws and unjust laws.
You can make the claim that the law is unjust based on whatever moral authority you're using to justify that claim.
Right, but then it would be a moral discussion.
That's my point. It would turn into a moral discussion at that point. But ultimately, too, if you do this, whatever moral authority you use, whatever law you want to make, ultimately it's going to come down to force to enact that law.
Which is different than the actual writing of the law itself and the justification of a law. So, for example, you and I would both want to do away with Skittles' marriage, correct?
Yes.
Why? Is that an unjust,
because
an unjust recognition of what is metaphysically true?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think we agree on that. It's biblically degenerate.
Right. And we would argue that it's objectively degenerate, right?
Yes.
And the same thing, we would want to ban the unaliving of the unborn babies, correct?
Right.
Right. And we're doing that before force happens. We're doing that as a result of what is morally true outside of what has been written into law.
Yeah, I think it was in my opener. I even said that you can use whatever system you want to come up with these ideas. You even granted that you could have someone do the exact same scenario, but they're basing their moral authority on something that is ultimately not moral. What ultimately is going to come down to is whatever these ideas are, however you come up with them, doesn't matter how you come up with them. If you don't have an enforcement mechanism, they just remain these metaphysical ideas.
Again, the actual circumstances of what force does or doesn't do is separate from the fact of whether or not something is or isn't wrong, because then you would have to grant Skittles' marriage and
But that's
the
a moral.
unaliving
Yeah,
of
it's a moral
babies.
claim. Yeah, that's a moral claim.
But it's a moral reality.
Yeah, I can even grant some moral reality, but once again, it's a moral discussion.
Yeah.
Morality is separate from necessarily force. You can have, as we see in the case with Iran, you can have bad force.
But the unalived babies, they can't use force, right? Does that mean they never had rights? Does that mean that nothing wrong happened when they were unalived, when they couldn't take up arms as unborn babies and then run in the streets with bandanas?
So in the case, the funny case of babies running down the street with bandanas and rifles is amusing, but when you
Try to deny it.
what you're saying, prove this unfalsifiable claim. It happened. Yeah.
No, prove it's not funny is what I was getting at, but go ahead.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. No, it is a funny image. But if you're saying that because the babies don't have a way to enact force, that might imply that I'm saying they don't have, I guess, rights, or is that
what I'm creating a fork with is between the fact that because enforcement can't happen is not an answer to whether or not a right was violated. And so if something was absolutely done wrong when the baby was unalived before it could implement force, and because it's impossible pretty much for these unalived unborn babies to implement force anyway, that means that effectively rights couldn't exist for those who were taken out, who were helpless, which is completely counter to biblical ethics, because we're supposed to speak up for the fatherless and the widow. And true religion is this: to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Go ahead.
Yeah. So even in that scenario, I would say two things. One, in the case of the babies, it would rely on people like us with the correct moral guidelines to enact some sort of force in order to stop it.
We'd be justified in that force, right?
We'd be exactly. We'd be justified in that force.
Why?
But what?
Why?
Because every human is made in the image of God, and they have intrinsic value.
And that intrinsic value confers them rights to not be murdered, right?
You could say that infers them rights, and that doesn't go against my argument. My argument is that if you have a right that's a concept for this baby, ultimately, unless we use force to stop it, it's just an idea.
So if it's just an idea, then before it happens, then all we have is the idea that the baby should not be unalived, and then the competing idea that the baby should be unalived, and then what's the tiebreaker between those two if it's not absolute morality and the value of the human life?
Force.
That's no, because force hadn't happened yet. We're having a dialogue to evaluate both the ideas of the baby should be unalived, the baby should not be unalived.
Well,
so force can't be the equation while the question is still in the air.
It can. Well, no, it can, because here's the situation. The question is currently still in the air currently. But if I collectivize with Christians and I pass a law making it illegal for abortion, I've used force in order to get my point across.
Which you've already admitted was justified by a prior moral law.
Yeah.
Right. And then so theirs is unjustified by a prior moral law, which relates to them being made in the image of God, which gives them rights to live.
Say that last part again.
So you had said that the justification for you passing that law was a prior moral law, as in it pre-existed the situation of the baby being alive in the first place. So when you say the tiebreaker is force, the question is, are you using force justly? And if you're saying yes, then that means your force corresponds to a pre-existent right conferred to that person based on their intrinsic value.
Yeah, well, this goes hand in hand with what I said currently before, is you can make any claim you want, any structure, any law, any what you would call rights, unless you have an enforcement apparatus, you don't really get anywhere with it. It stays this philosophical idea that you think that this is the right way to do things. You have the ought, but you haven't changed the is.
So between the two people who are discussing whether the baby should be alived or not unalived, all they have are equal value ideas in their head. There's nothing that gives intrinsic truth claims to one side or the other.
Well, no, I wouldn't agree with that, because I would say that intrinsically we would have the right view. But once again, to enact that view requires force.
What's the right view?
That every baby is made in the image of God.
And why does that translate to not unaliving them?
Because it goes against biblical commandments.
And why does it go against biblical commandments? What makes being in the image of God confer what it says in Genesis 9:6, that if anybody unalives somebody, so therefore his blood shall be shed. If anybody sheds another man's blood, therefore his blood shall be shed for being made in the image of God. How does that work?
That's a enforcement mechanism on what is considered biblical law.
The enforcement mechanism is a separate question of why the enforcement mechanism is prescribed by God.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand your
If you want, me
here.
and Defnot can go back and forth if you want to take some notes and come back at me.
Well, I don't understand your question, really.
Yeah, so
I don't understand how it fits.
the point is, when you have two people saying one says we need to unalive this baby, and the other says we should not unalive this baby, and you're saying that they're not, just because they're both conceptual doesn't mean that one is not better than the other. Conceptual does not mean irrelevant. Conceptual just means that it is not material. It is of the mind. I would argue that the value given by God is of the mind of God, and because the mind of God is the cornerstone of reality, therefore it becomes absolutely true by necessity. But that's beside the point. What I'm saying is, if you have two competing ideas, the tiebreaker in this case should be a moral absolute tiebreaker, which justifies the use of force, because otherwise, if you just say the use of force is the use of force, then the question it comes down to is like, okay, if you can have a justified use of force and an unjustified use of force, that means that before you take force, you have to take in consideration the rights of the individuals you may be offending if there's not a superseding justification for taking those actions of force. Abe, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask. I was going to ask for a quick clarification. So, is it the case then, re-examination, that which is morally right confers a level of right to the people, the person, us? That which is morally right can confer a level of rights to people.
I would say the identity is what gives the rights to people. That which is morally right, in terms of like the situation in question, I'd have to hear an example to put it in priority.
What you're talking about right now. What you're talking about right now, right? The right to life, because it's morally wrong to take life from that which bears the image of God. It is morally right to let that live, or to continue the life of
defend
the baby,
that right,
the unborn. Right, is what also confers the right in that mode. Because
I feel like I should let you talk for a bit, because I want to get my arms around the mechanics of your idea. So I think I agree with what you're saying, but I'm not sure that I see the car is running, but I don't know what the motor looks like. You know what I'm saying? I want to know what the contingencies are.
So I guess my question is, do moral oughts confer rights?
I would have to think about that. I would have to think about all sorts of cases. What I can say as far as humans, I would say that in the cases where God says, do not cross these lines with people, those lines are the boundaries for what forms the rights of individual people, and also forms the rights of entities such as married couple families and governments and churches. So whatever God establishes as that which the lines that you do not cross, that's within the jurisdiction of an individual or a government or things like that. Those have priority as far as their rights, up until the point where, like, say, if you end somebody else's life unjustifiably, like if it wasn't in self-defense, which, by the way, is also a right enumerated when Jesus allows the disciples to have two swords with them. But I would say that those boundaries that God draws are a right in terms of your life belonging to you up until the point where you forfeit it by taking someone else's life, for example. And I would also use 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul says, again, that he has the right to eat and drink or take a wife. There's not necessarily a duty to take a wife, because then Jesus would have violated the duty in his manhood to not have had a wife. And so, but you have the right, as it says in 1 Corinthians 9, to choose whether or not to ever get married. That's one example.
So I do have a question for you, Re-Exam.
Yeah.
So based on the scenario you gave, the analogy, you have one party saying we should do the abortions, other party, which would be more aligned with our side, saying no, you shouldn't be allowed to do the abortions.
Yeah.
The party that wants to do the abortions, they believe, based on their moral authority that they subscribe to, that they are correct.
Yep.
How can the thing that splits the difference be anything but force?
Because my splitting the difference does not occur on the material level. It occurs on the justification level, which is why I asked you, can force be justified or unjustified? And justification has to do with morals, because rights are a moral claim. They're not a circumstantial claim about who is in government and where the gun is being pointed. That's what my argument is.
But that is under the paradigm of you and people who agree with you thinking that you are correct in that assertion.
But in both cases, we are both consenting to the idea that there are absolute moral laws. One person thinks that the right is for the person to unalive the baby, and the other person thinks it's for the right of the baby to not be unalived. So even if you want to talk about common consensus, which I don't think is the basis of the argument at all, I think the basis has to do with moral objectivism in relationship to the God of the Bible. But in both cases, they are arguing from a moral absolute standpoint in which somebody's rights are being violated. One thinks it's the woman, and one thinks it's the baby.
Yeah, so I can grant that and agree with you. Probably, agree with you on a lot of that, obviously. But if the argument stays there, the two parties, what happens?
What do you mean stays there?
If it never goes anywhere, if you have one part, if there's nothing that happens, you just have two groups of people saying we think we're morally right. Other group says we think we're morally right. If it only ever stays in the argumentation planning phase, whatever you want to call it, what happens?
I don't think that's relevant to what a right is, because the fact that you're discussing it means that it's in the ideas realm in the first place. It's not in the what happens
realm. If it never leaves that, though, what happens?
If it never leaves the discussion phase, then I guess you talk forever.
Yes.
What do you mean?
Okay, well, that's my point. Nothing happens.
I don't think that's relevant.
You need a governance. Of course it's relevant.
No, it's not.
So how are you going to get your side to enact what they think is correct?
We're not talking about what I'm going to do. We're talking about the existence of rights, which I agree are immaterial. But the prompt is not what are you going to do when rights are violated. The prompt is, do rights exist? And if they do, what are they grounded on? Not what happens after a right is violated.
My point the entire night has been that the rights essentially are just ideas, which I think we just concluded the same thing with this discussion right here.
If you mean ideas in the mind of God, then that's a moral realism, then sure, but that doesn't make it fake. Sure. It makes it real.
Whether it's God or whatever, whatever you want to say, if it only ever stays there and you don't have any enforcement apparatus, then nothing really happens.
Which I can grant, but that just seems trivial compared to do rights exist?
Well, and also, Mo, as a question, wouldn't that fall into a syllogism that would basically state that if rights exist, we must enforce them, and thus rights must exist?
I actually have a syllogism for that, actually. I think I wrote one here. Yeah, so syllogism, I have syllogism 1 here. Only things that constrain behavior have real-world effects. Rights do not constrain behavior without enforcement. Enforcement is force, therefore only force, not rights, has real-world effects.
I can agree
So
that there, if real world effects talks about like everything before death, I mean, people can go.
Yeah, I've already.
Yeah, but I again, I
Yeah.
don't think if the fact that okay, if the fact that we have rights written down, like that it just proves that it's conceptual, which comes before action. What you're describing again is action. So I don't think that that answers the question of whether or not rights exist. You're just answering a separate question of what happens if you disagree about a law, which is completely different. But what I'm pointing out is the whole point of us having rights enumerated in laws in the first place is a reflection of human dignity, human value, and the rights that come with it, including property rights, including the right to defend yourself, including the right to life.
What
Things
is
like that.
So, okay. So then, what is your definition of exist in this context?
As in recognize, in this context, as in recognized by the mind of God in terms of relating to humanity's dignity and scope of property. So I defined rights in this case as the moral scope of my ability to make permissions and choices with what belongs to me and what I have been entrusted with. So that's what I mean by rights. And obviously, if we violate somebody else's rights, then the government, as a superseding body, is entrusted to correct that. But that's a posteriori of the actual right in question being offended. It's reactionary. It's not intrinsic to what the right is.
Yeah. So once again, I mean, my case all night, which I think I've demonstrated with multiple examples, is that I can grant most of what you're saying, but at the end of the day, if you just have this concept of a right, unless you have some sort of enforcement, it never materializes. And you can separate the divine judgment part, right? You can say that post hoc, okay, you're a degenerate bastard, and you get some divine judgment after you die. I think that's two separate claims.
Sure. And I think it's also two separate claims of whether a right has been violated and whether you go to jail for it or get unalived for it. Because obviously, you go to jail only in the fact. Let's just say there was no corruption. It was just really no corruption. It was just a really simple thing. You robbed a bank. You go to jail. The robbing of the bank occurred first. The robbery itself presupposes property rights. Property rights are not made of matter. They are true in the eyes of God, and they bind us all morally. Therefore, if the laws are a reflection of those property rights, then the entailment would be punishment from the government, who would have the obligation and the duty and the scope, meaning also the right to and the jurisdiction to be the ones to lock that person up or deal with them as they see fit in the scope of what the punishment does in terms of fitting the crime. But all the same, it's not matter in motion. It's actual violation of rights, which do not exist materially and are violated regardless of whether or not enforcement happens. If you steal something, it's still stolen, whether or not you run off to Mexico.
Okay, so I think I might have a better... Okay, so throughout the night, we've kind of been dancing around like, okay, the rights being a concept, and just because that concept is infringed upon doesn't mean it wasn't infringed upon, and then the entailment of that infringement in a lot of cases is a force mechanism, which I think you've granted, right? But you're still making the case that that doesn't mean the right hasn't been infringed upon, right?
Yes, the right being infringed upon is what justifies the action of enforcement.
Okay, so let's just say but what if it wasn't, what if we didn't call it rights, right? What if we just call it like, do no bad or do good, you know? We just replace it with something else, some other linguistic saying, right? That we can make up whatever we fucking want, right? Whatever you make up conceptually, for it to actually mean anything in our current mortal plane, there has to be an enforcement apparatus in order to restrain something.
So are you saying that
But that wouldn't make them not exist, right?
That wouldn't make them... The idea would still exist, but it wouldn't be materialized in any meaningful way.
Well, would the idea exist in the mind of God prior to humans?
Yeah, let's say God is all... He has all the good and no bad. That's...
Well, what I'm saying
still
is,
exists in his...
if God grants, for example, property rights, or even if you want to use a different, property X, if you want to say property X instead of rights, if rights is not the thing. The thing doing the work here is the fact that human value gives boundaries to what others can do to you on a moral level, which is why Romans 13 talks about the conscience. Conscience is not written in legal structure. Conscience is written on the hearts of
Moral.
individuals. Correct. So that's a priori. The enforcement is a posteriori. So those are two different things, and it does not affect the a posteriori does not affect what happened a priori, is what I'm getting at. So
Yeah. Once
Right.
again, I can grant that the concept. I mean, the concept of rights, whatever, and you can trade that out with like whatever framework you want. As I said, I can grant those ideas exist, right? But ultimately, it doesn't mean anything unless they're enforced.
Okay, well, I think we just hit an impasse then, because I think I've stated my case, you've stated your case. But if you want, we can move on to me and Defnot, because that's the only combo
Yeah.
we've not done yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, I would just quickly reference that, even in the analogy of Superman, right? Like, you can't give him a right. You can't enforce a right on him. He has no need for rights, right? The enforcement really is what, as we understand rights and how they operate in our government system, or just on any collective social system, is going to come down to some sort of force mechanism.
And we could also make that more meaningful, Mo, if we took your asshole Superman and we turned that into asshole billionaire warlord, right? Like
Sure.
somebody who functions in the world in a way that most normal people cannot, and holds power in a way that makes them capable of superseding the rights of others and protecting their own with incredible prejudice, right?
Yeah, that's why. Well, that's why I took it down to the warlord level. Like, Defnot didn't like Superman for whatever reason.
Well,
took it
it's
down to warlord
understandable
level
because it makes it unattainable, right? It makes
took it down
unattainable.
to. Well, I would say that analogies are used to test, extremes in order to test
Sure.
logic. So I don't think. And then we can even take it down to, crazy, sand people. But
Star Wars.
yeah.
Yes.
Star Wars.
That's what I'm going to say for the sake of this conversation. So yeah,
Well, I mean, it's descriptively true. Come on.
I'll just let Mo have the last word on that, and we'll move on. Defnot, do you believe that there is intrinsic value to human life?
I think so.
Okay, so that would be universally prescriptive.
Yeah, I could say that.
Okay, now, do you believe in the soul, an immaterial part of a person?
I'm
human
leaning
specifically?
towards it, yeah.
Okay, so you would say you're open to, if not accepting of, a spiritual realm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now, what do you think gives deference, or how do I put this? What do you think gives purpose to human life, if not the intent of the one who owns humans, being the God of the Bible, which is what I believe?
Well, obviously, I don't particularly subscribe to that, so
Yes.
you're kind of smuggling a little bit in there
Well,
in the question.
I'm making clear my position. You are free
okay.
to counter that.
What is the question? What is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
Or
So
something like
if
that?
we
I'd love to know that.
yeah, so I argue that we can only really have rights if we have purpose, because if you've agreed that we're not necessarily just matter in motion. We have an immaterial part to ourselves that has an immaterial value to it that cannot be violated. But how do you get that without a unified source of purpose?
Why does it have to be? I'm not seeing the jump. I mean, I'm calling it a jump, but I'm not seeing the connection there of why something has to also exist on top of that, like that.
Yeah. So the question is, what is the basis for our rights in your mind?
I think I mentioned this earlier, but because we are the kinds of beings that make our own decisions, it would be wrong to deny us agency, and agency being kind of the root of them all.
Well, wrong by what standard?
I guess by my personal preference.
Could your personal preference change though?
Yeah, it could.
What makes one personal preference that is contrary to another personal preference more or less valid or valuable?
My preference.
So your preference justifies your preference?
Pretty much. I mean, people believe things because they prefer to believe them.
So would you say that if you unalived somebody and it's wrong only because you prefer, for example, if you have a jail and you put people in a cage, is that based on a structure of preferences that you've convinced the majority of people to engage in?
Pretty much, because if we didn't prefer to do it, we wouldn't be doing it. So enough people preferred to do that. So
I agree that that's a consequence, but that kind of sounds
Relativism.
Does that make it right or wrong because more people than not have chosen to take a course of action?
I think that some things are wrong on like a base level, but that is my opinion, and I prefer to believe that. I'm not saying that other people's opinions are equally as good as mine.
Okay, so, but you could say something is objectively wrong regardless of whether you existed in order to opine that or not, right?
It is my belief that that is the case, but I can't like prove that. I don't know how that's like, what is the meaning of life is something I would love to know, but I don't know if that's like, I would posit that there is one, and I think we all agree on that. So like, for the sake of discussion, I think that we can all agree there is a meaning of life, and we can move on from there. Why there is one or isn't one, I'm still figuring that out. Maybe I'll at some point get to some like solid conclusion on that, but the fact is I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. All we can do is sort of like guess and reason it out with the tools that we have, but we can never really know for sure.
Yeah. Would you present any reasons to believe that it could not be the God of the Bible? Like that's impossible?
No, I mean, of course, everything is possible, logically speaking. Like, everything is technically possible.
Okay.
It's
So,
just not probable.
okay. So if you would say that it's possible for rights that are universally binding to not be grounded in God, but you also you ground them as in they are justified in your worldview by your preferences, then I don't know. I guess I can't relate, because it just seems like the whole idea of justice is enforcement upon those who are unwilling to do otherwise. They're unruly. Like, somebody say you got Antifa and they go out rioting and things like that, and then you would have to say that it's more than your preferences that say that Antifa busting open windows is wrong. You would have to say that there's something that's universally binding over all humans, right?
It is my opinion that that's the case, but it is my preference to believe that that is the case, if that makes sense.
Okay. Do you believe justice is real?
Yeah, of course.
Do you believe that you can escape justice?
I tend to think it circles back to you eventually somehow, but I'm not exactly sure how.
Hold on.
Interesting.
Hold on. I need to make a clarification here.
Yeah.
Do you believe justice is real as in it's real, or the concept of justice is real? Because there's a difference there.
You're asking Def or
I
me?
think we're talking about concepts.
I'm
here.
asking Def.
Yeah.
I think we are talking about concepts here. I mean, this is very like concept-oriented discussion as far as I can tell. So yeah, the concept of.
Is that what you meant? Reexamination? The concept of justice, or justice as a
moral realist,
virtue or
as a
value?
morally real thing.
Okay, so
for example, like if you're in government, you were entrusted with dealing out justice to those who have offended somebody's rights. Justice being like the satisfaction of punishment required for an offense. Whether that's giving the money back you stole or something, jail time, something equivalent to that. The moral binding that requires that action a posteriori of the offense. When you say justice as a concept, when I hear you say justice as a concept, what I'm hearing is an atheist libertarian has a concept that they preferentially believe are rights versus that. I'm rejecting that.
okay.
Go ahead.
That's the issue. So my issue was if it is the case that preferences are the basis by which justice is doled out, then justice doesn't actually mean justice. It means a subjective representation of what you think justice is, and not an objective metric of justice, right? And so if it's not just conceptual, if it's objective, if actual justice is an objective metric, then preferences don't play into it. It's a thing, not just a concept.
Well, we would have to know like what that is though. And the only way we can know what that is because we prefer to believe in a certain version of it. So if that is like some kind of universal concept, which I do personally happen to believe, it's still like us understanding that as a thing and even going as far as to apply it, but even just understanding it, even just understanding that sort of thing, we're using our own minds to do that, and like we use our own minds to understand any other concept. So like we use our minds to understand or try to understand whatever God
Right.
may or may not be. That doesn't mean that we know for a fact. Like we can call something objective because we like want it to be, or like we, to the best of our understanding, that's how we think of it. But we still only have our minds to kind of come to that conclusion.
Right. So one of the things that would come to mind for me, right, is say there's a nation that says if a woman doesn't cover her hair, it's okay to do an honor killing of that woman. We would all probably agree that's not justice. But in that nation, they may completely say that that is justice. And so there's a difference between the concept and the value. And so that's what I was asking. If there's a difference to you, a meaningful distinction between the concept and the reality of justice. And I don't even know how to convey it fully. So
Is that a question for me or?
I guess it's for everyone because I don't,
Yeah, I mean,
to me,
sure.
there's a difference in
I
my
just kind of
head.
zoned out.
if you have a system where you base your moral authority on yourself, which sounds like that's what this is, it's my preference, then you really don't have anything to stand on, morally speaking, if another group comes up and says, this is my preference to enact whatever horror thing I want on you.
Sure, I've heard that argument before, but I'm saying I prefer to believe in certain specific things that, like, I believe that are objective, but aren't really relevant to the discussion of rights at all. So when I settle
But-
on which thing that I am really, really into fighting for, I'll let you know.
All right.
But
Well-
so far, I'm not sure.
Well, as far as my angle, Mo, I think I've gotten as deep as I'm going to get with Def, not because she has taken, I would say, an undecided position. Is that fair, Def?
Yeah, I would say so. It's like I hope that these things are like as real as I really hope they are, but I don't have like specific evidence for them, so I can't like claim like, oh, this is absolutely objective because I don't have evidence for that being the case.
Yeah, I don't have studies, but I think anecdotally, at least, we can say that when people continuously harm their consciences, start to lose their grip and become more and more unwell in every area of life. And so I would say that has to do with our intrinsic nature, being made in the image of God, being given a conscience, being having recognized who God is on some implicit level, as it talks about in Romans 1:18, when it says God has revealed himself to them so that they are without excuse, that both in the nature of the world that he's created and also just in the laws he's written in our hearts, that even though we don't have like a one-to-one, we're not like carbon copies of each other in our understanding of the world, we still have a basic understanding of the starkest, clearest things, even if we're kind of hazy on all the most specific details. I think that there's an argument from the existence of forgiveness that you can see that Christ is God. And what I mean by that is in every other religion except for Christianity, you basically have this system where you pay off God. But if God is God, he owns everything already. You can't pay him off with what already belongs to him. Salvation has to be a free gift. And so the fact that we as humans exercise forgiveness as a moral enterprise, regardless of culture, there is such a thing as redemption and forgiveness. I think that, and not to mention the idea of sacrifice, of one taking the results of our punishment in our place, then I would say that is kind of a signature of the Lord Jesus Christ himself that we can see in ourselves as we forgive people, whereas it's highly imaginable to think of a world where forgiveness is not real. We're just these meat blobs that don't even have relationships with each other. We just go around surviving, and we don't have anyone have moral interaction, personal interaction, relationships of any kind. But we live in this universe where not only are there laws, not only are there duties, but there is redemption, and the redemption comes freely. It is not earned. If it was earned, it would not be forgiveness. So if I were you, I would just contemplate on that in terms of the Lord Jesus Christ, as opposed to any other ancient value system, which is dependent upon the self. And really, I would argue, flips it on its head, where you are the God who cranks the system and then gets the results you want going to your heaven or nirvana. Whereas if it's the Lord Jesus Christ, grace is a free gift, heaven is a free gift, mercy is completely of the Lord. And that's why the Psalms say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. And which is why Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection. Things like that. Salvation is, as B.S. Lewis would hate me saying, salvation is a person. It is not a thing. It's the Lord Jesus Christ. So that's my pitch to you. And I will let you have the last word, because seeing as you're undecided, I don't know what else to say. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a as you know, I don't have a problem with people believing in God, in whichever way they want to, as long as they're not trying to infringe on my rights, which is kind of what this is about. And something else that I've heard, like in the video, I kind of also bring this up, but I don't know if I really touch upon it as strongly. It's something like rights that we come to, like in algebra, you can take a problem and you can get to the same true result in many different directions. That's kind of how I think about rights. We have different people kind of ground them differently. Different people have different reasons for why they think rights as like a concept is a true thing. Like people that believe in God and sin, like those are also sure you can't touch it, but people think that those are like true, real things. That's kind of how I think about rights. And even though people arrive at them in different ways, they have disagreements about like which rights are which, and we have discussions about them. But more people tend to agree that rights are something that exists as this concept that affects us. And it seems like if people keep arriving at this answer from so many different directions, there might be something to it. Something that I would really like to also kind of hammer in, something that I've brought up earlier. How does exactly do we get from granting, how do I phrase this? The whole like grant and origin versus enforcement. I'm having trouble with that connection there, because I keep hearing that, because even if I were to grant that men exclusively enforce, even if we were to grant that, which like obviously we just showed how that's not true. But even if I were to grant that, just because somebody enforces something doesn't mean they are the source of it, doesn't mean they grant it.
Well,
right. The cop is
so
not the legislator.
Right. So I'm going to throw this out there. I think the connection, like the neural work of that, is that absent something to make sure that you can function within that right, then that right can't be there. And so if say you have no right to something, and okay, if you have a right to something and there's nothing there to make sure that nothing tramples that, then how does that right exist? And so that's usually where that falls apart. Like if you have the right to vote, but every single time you go to vote, you're stopped and you're forced to not do it, then you don't have that right.
Well, no, you do. It's just being violated. This is a question I asked before to Mo and never got an answer. What do we call this thing where rights are violated? What's the difference between a right being violated and ceasing to exist? I don't think I ever got an answer to that one.
It's a situation of you just kind of described it. A right is violated, but you could call this right, this piece of paper, this thing that you write, it could be a falugulu. You can whatever you want to name it. It doesn't matter what it is. It's the enforcement arm of actually making sure you keep the falugulu, or in your case, the right.
So a right can be violated, but not, it doesn't like cease
Sure.
to exist because it's violated, right?
It ceases to have any real world implications unless there's a enforcement mechanism behind
Hold
it.
on. It does cease to exist if it's always violated
other
and
extreme.
never
Right.
enforced, right?
That's a good point.
So, like, if you have the right to life, and everybody starts offing each other, and nothing stops that, then no one actually has the right to life at that
Right.
point, right?
No, you
That's-
do have a right. It's just being violated. That's why we have the word violated a right.
So if you put a bunch of people in chains and you do that in perpetuity until the end of time, then their right never existed, even though you have the same ontology.
Well, it wouldn't be observably existing at that point,
Right.
right?
It depends on if you regard the conscience or not. Because if you
Right.
say,
I agree. No, I agree with you.
Because
I totally agree with that.
like,
but
like I don't know why rights have to be observant in the same way that you observe a caterpillar in order to exist. I mean, we already believe in the laws of logic, and then we don't say, well, if somebody is illogical, then how are the laws of logic still standing? We don't talk like that. But
Well, no, the laws of logic have real world consequence to it. Like a
Right.
tree isn't magically a unicorn.
right, but the laws of logic can exist
So,
where
that
there's
is-
a universe with illogical minds, right?
Right, but that's my point.
Right.
It has but no, the state, the example you just brought up, whiskey's getting to me, is that when the laws of logic have real world consequences that we have to accept and act in order to even exist.
Yep.
So a tree is not just a unicorn randomly. A is always A.
Right.
So that would be the physical component in regards, you bring it back to this rights, is if you have a metaphysical concept of a right, if it's to Abe's point, if it's never enforced, then it doesn't exist.
Okay. So then if I violate a logical law in an argumentation, then the law still stands, even though there's been nothing physical that happened.
Say that one more time.
If I violate a law of logic in my reasoning, it doesn't affect anything, and the law still stands, right?
Yeah, you're just making stuff up in your head. Yeah, it's incoherent nonsense you're just
Right.
making up.
Right. So if I offend somebody's right, and then nothing physically happens to me, then the right still stands.
It depends. If you do that, if everyone does that, and the right is never corrected by any enforcement mechanism, then no, it doesn't exist.
So then there's no reason in order to stop the unaliving of babies because no rights are there to offend. There's no justification for the use of force to stop the unaliving of babies.
No, it would be a statement that if nothing is done to stop it in perpetuity, then they don't have a right that's been codified in some meaningful
Right.
way.
Then why would you do
And
it?
again, this goes back to what you and I said earlier. There's a difference between legal and moral, and because there's a distinction between legal and moral, there's legal rights and there's moral rights.
I already agree with
At
that.
least in and so because of that, there's this weird schism between the two, because if something that is a legal right is never enforced or protected, then you can't meaningfully say that right exists, whereas with the moral you could.
But the prompt is not, do legal rights exist?
I agree with you.
So this whole discussion this entire time has been about rights absent of what has been written by people in law. That's what I'm getting at. The enforcement has always been a posteriori, and the justification of the enforcement is dependent upon the existence of the rights in question at all. So that's my angle with that. So if we're talking about, do legal rights exist, then we'd have to ask which country and which laws and which time and what we're talking about. Because if all we're saying is that do legal rights exist, then we're not having a debate anymore, because all I have to do is look up some .gov webpage. But
no, because there is an entire subsection of the entirety of the population that believes in subjective moral values.
yeah, but that would
And
still be a
those moral
right.
values, but okay, there would be a disagreement in what rights exist then.
I agree that
And so how would
disagreements
you-
can exist. Same thing with somebody can make a fallacy, and yet the
Is
laws
it a
of logic
right to
still exist.
unalive babies?
It is not a right to unalive babies.
But it is in some states.
It is again, the equivocation is legal right versus the right I'm talking about, which is transcendent. So I agree with you. But again, I'm saying that I can already grant that legal is different, but legal is transient.
But there would that's my point, though.
transcendental.
My point would be there would be a distinction between a subjective or a not subjective, a non-religious and a religious subsect of the population, right? There would be a difference at that point, because
A
one
difference
would
of
say
opinion, yeah.
there is no moral right. It's codified in some way, and so that's what I'm drilling in on. And I'm not saying that actually changes the stance of this actual debate. I'm saying that you could say if there's no grounding versus some system that grounds, it does change what right means
In law.
to people.
Okay, so
I guarantee you there's people out there that see rights as the legal thing
when I'm saying
and nothing else.
when I'm being asked, do rights exist? I am answering, and I have been answering from the objective standpoint, objective morality, and only in that realm, not in subjective opinions or philosophy discussions or legal discussions or anything like that. So I've been answering to that. I can grant everything that you're saying in terms of like there is a legal realm where we have rights. Like when we talk about existence, for example. I was in discussion with Shiva. I think he was clarifying with JS one time. When we say exist, Bugs Bunny does not exist as an actual anthropomorphic rabbit that walks around and talks to people and eats carrots saying, "What's up, Doc?" But he does exist in copyright law, and he does exist in the minds of people, and he does exist representationally in film and things like that. But he doesn't exist the same way that you and I exist in the physical and spiritual realm. So I can assent to different categories of existence. I can assent to legal categories, which we call rights. I would argue that legal rights ought, which is a moral claim, ought to reflect the rights that pre-exist us already in our human identity being made in the image of God, as best as possible as we can do. Now, government is, of course, tricky. So, and we have a wicked, wacky world. So we got to do the best we can in that. But I agree that people have opinions. I agree that laws exist, and I agree that there are objective moral rights given to men because they're made in the image of God by their creator.
Yeah, the Bugs Bunny example, like if you're looking at like the justified true belief stance, that would be knowledge about something, right?
Yeah, about like
So,
copyright
like Bugs
law
Bunny.
concepts.
Right. Well,
that are
just
only
him in
concepts.
general. Like it could be Sherlock Holmes, right? It could be like about him, and you're justified in knowing about. It fits the justified true belief criteria, but it's knowledge about something, not something like intrinsically true, whatever you want to label it.
It depends. When you say intrinsically true, how does that relate to like copyright law or like a child's imagination of characters in his head? When you say intrinsically true, help me out with that.
Well, under justified true belief, you have to for knowledge, you have to have it has to be justified, it has to be true, and you have to believe it, right? That's the classic.
Sure.
But here's the thing: like if you apply that logic to, if you apply that criteria to things like Bugs Bunny or Sherlock Holmes, you could say, well, no, technically it doesn't fit it's not true that Sherlock Holmes exists, but it's a knowledge about something. That's the distinction. So you still fit the criteria, but it's just knowledge about something, not something that is real.
Yeah, I can have
sense.
justified true belief that a person who isn't real in life is a character in literature.
Right.
Yep.
Ding
So
ding.
nobody's. I'm still yet to hear proof of how granting is the same as enforcing. So just because somebody enforces something doesn't mean they are the source of or granting it. For instance, do cops grant us property, or do they enforce property rights?
No, the government and your rights do, but the police and the police force would be the enforcement of those things.
Right. So they're enforcing it, but they're not granting it.
Right. But the question I would ask then to you, Def, would be absent somebody protecting that right,
Mm-hmm.
do you have that thing? Like if somebody can come take your property from you at any time and nothing can stop it, do you have the right to have it?
Yes, it's just being violated.
Okay.
So like it, for
I
instance,
agree that you have the right to own your land. But if
But what-
anything
but
can
what-
take it at any time, do you have a right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yes.
it's a weird thing that's like the difference
If
between
Superman was there 24/7 and he said, "No, you cannot have property,"
no,
Yes,
so,
I would still have the right, and Superman would be violating that right.
right.
That's why we have this language. If I don't burn your house down, did I grant you ownership of your home? If I choose to not like sneak over there at night and like set it on fire, do I grant you the ownership of the house?
no, you're just choosing not to be an arsonist.
Okay.
If
So
you have- if
just
you have the
because
physical-
something could be destroyed or fails to be enforced doesn't mean it's being granted.
But you're not
There's a
you're
different
not an
concept.
enforcement arm of the government either.
So it requires
well,
the
they're gonna fail
justification
to
of the
enforce it
government.
because I set it on fire.
Right.
So
That
neither of
actually-
us.
Right. So if the power
That actually makes it meaningful too. Bringing in the governing system.
I'm glad we
Because the
agree. That
governing
makes me-
system well there's a level of difference here, because if the government takes your house from you but didn't take your right to own your property, like there's a whole nother
but government
level of
government-
cascading problems
government
there.
can't take rights that I'm talking about when it comes to the a priori rights. It's
No, actually, well, I was just going to say, just real quick, the government can take your property.
the government can take your property. The government can take away legal rights because that's the realm of the government, but they can't take away your intrinsic human rights. That's like I said in the bottom of my opening statement, that is far out of reach of mankind and safely kept in the hands of God.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I think you're just categorizing like rights differently. I guess. Well, then my question to you would be, you have this category of, and I agree with you, by the way, on a lot of these, this take. But would you say those have anything to do with what we consider like our amendment rights? Like, do you think that is the same thing? They're interchangeable, or do you think they're separate?
So there's a few things here. I think we as human beings have a responsibility when we institute or participate in government to make our laws reflectant of the moral laws that come before a government is established. I would say that. Can you repeat that question one more time? Because I had more, but I need to refresh.
So we had, no worries. We've been discussing rights all night, and especially with me and you, it seems to be different categories of what our definitions of rights are. When I'm referring to rights, I'm talking about the physical, visceral enforcement of rights in a legal sense, in a government structure, that sort of thing. You're talking about intrinsic rights under God. My question is, do you see those as separate, or do you see them as interchangeable?
I see them as separate but not unrelated. I think they're related. But it's interesting that what you said was the enforcement, which again is a posteriori of the question of has a right been violated, right? It is a reactionary operation with respect to a pre-existent right, which is different than the right itself. So to even say, do you have a right if it's not enforced, is just the same thing to say as like, how could humans have, if that was the case, that no rights exist if they're not enforced, then did the right come into existence once the force occurred? Because that would be strange.
But here's the thing, like going to Abe's point earlier, like if you have a right in a legal sense that has been consistently infringed upon, do you actually even have a right? Because, example, if you tomorrow decide, I'm going to go live in China, and you go there, are you going to expect to have all the rights that you have currently in America, or no?
If you're talking about legally, no.
Okay.
If you're talking about morally, absolutely. Wherever I live, I will have the same amount of actual rights, regardless of where I live.
Okay. But so then, definitionally, then they would have to be separate.
Yes, but not
No.
unrelated. They're separate, but they're not unrelated. So, for example, again, if we're going to institute a government, we have to have a just government, right? Because unequal weights and unequal measures are an abomination before the Lord. And there has to be an understanding of what a just law is and an unjust law, with both you and I agree with skilled marriage and with unaliving the unborn. So there is a prior consideration to all forms of government, all laws, all operations, and all enforcement.
Right, but you can also have a government that doesn't give a shit about any of that. It makes immoral rights and laws. And
I agree. What I'm talking about should. I'm talking about the ought. I'm not talking about the is.
ought. Right, but that ought would fall into the moral claim,
Exactly.
not the government structure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, this is what I thought we were gonna go. Honestly, I thought it would basically go this way because I in my head, there's this separation between the moral foundations that constitute rights and the legal foundations that constitute rights, and we have a through line of certain rights that are moral that play into the legal realm, and then you have a whole other host of things that are completely disjointed from each other. And because of that, it makes what is a right and what is not a right a very fuzzy place, right? There's things that are obvious to most people, right? Like your right to life is pretty obvious. Like you shouldn't be offing people shouldn't be offing each other. You have the right to live unimpeded, as far as living goes. But there's a whole host of things that fall in the realm of rights that are more wishy-washy and I'm unsure of. And so yeah. And I figured we were going to get to that. That would be the breakdown. The breakdown is, what is a right? And I think that we dug in pretty good on a lot of that. I agree with the moral stance that which is within that moral framework of what is a right, like life, makes a lot of sense. There's the other things, though, beyond that which we argued about. Like, I agree that you have the right, like you were saying, Def, to that ownership, and the infringement actually makes it real. If it can be infringed in that way, it makes that thing a reality. But we could say you're infringing on people's rights on things that are not a right, and that doesn't make them real, right? Like, I could say you're infringing on my right to punch people. Well, what right do you have to punch people, right? But that doesn't make it true. And so we have to find where the line is between what is a right and what is not a right. And I think the best way to do that is on the moral grounds.
Yeah, and I do think that there's definitely a difference between legal rights and moral rights. And as I've said many times, legal rights can be taken away by the government. Like things that are more like your human rights can't. That's something that you intrinsically have simply by being a human being. That is what you have, and nobody can take that from you. It can be violated. It can be violated by everybody on planet Earth at once. Literally, nobody enforces anything, and they all come and off you. That's possible, but they would have been violating that human right to live. And I would argue that there are different things, like property rights could be kind of a mixture of both, but that is also a legal right. And those legal rights are enforced by institutions like the police, for instance. That does not mean the police are granting us the rights. We know that rights are granted by the government overall. That usually comes from like Congress, the branches, whatever. We don't say the police grant us rights. That's ridiculous. I mean, I've never heard anybody claim that. There's a lot of things that could be done. There's a lot of things that could be done. Like, sure, in theory, somebody could go and, like, truckers could stop delivering all the food. Does that mean that they normally, like, grant us the right to eat because they could take all that away by just, like, stopping work? None of this it doesn't add up logically. Like it's incoherent to say that simply because somebody's enforcing something, that means they are the source of it. That there is no connection there.
I have a question
So-
in the chat for Mo.
Well,
go ahead.
Just real quick, can I just
Yeah.
question for Defnut? So in the example you just gave, if a king passes a law and then he sends his knight out to enforce that law, is the king enforcing it or the knights?
The knights are enforcing it, but the king is the source of it. So the king
Sure.
would be the king/government would be who granted the right,
Right.
not
Okay.
the knights. Knights aren't granting you anything.
Never said that they were.
Well, that's what you were saying when you said that men grant women rights. Because
Ultimately,
they enforce
yeah,
it.
because they have the ultimate force. But the
So that's
men
different.
who take, well, in a power structure, strip everything away. Ultimately, men do grant everyone rights, including other men. Yes.
But in
But
your
they do it
example
through-
of the
they
king,
do-
that
hold
might as
on,
well
hold
just
on,
be
hold
a
on,
queen,
hold on,
and we just agreed
hold on,
that the
hold
king
on,
or
hold
queen
on.
or
Let me
whoever
finish. Let
would be
me
the one
finish.
granting it.
Let me finish. And the king is doing that through an institution, you could call it. But ultimately, if a bunch of men collectivize and they throw off a government and they're doing it through the government, they're still enforcing it through men, like ultimately.
We just agreed that enforcement previously does not necessarily mean physical enforcement, and women also participate in enforcement, whether it's physical or not, especially the not physical.
It depends on the context. Yeah, it depends on the context.
So women can participate in enforcement. Women can participate
If
as
men
far
allow
as
it,
running the
yes.
government, as far
If
as
men allow it,
granting
yes.
the rights from the government.
If men allow
You
them to
put
participate, they
anything
can.
on it, like if men allow it, that goes right back to just because somebody takes something from you. Like the truckers don't grant us the right to eat because they deliver the food and they could stop at any time. That's the same
And
as
then
you're
the
like,
government
oh,
would send out
the
men
allow it.
to
Is there
take- to
anything
tell them
that
to
you could
knock that shit out.
possibly- Is there anything I could possibly say as an argument that would be like, well, here's how that changes things. Like the force doctrine can be disproven if I just prove X, Y, or Z. Like what can I say that would disprove?
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
That
I'll give you.
wouldn't
I'll
just
give you
be
the
like,
example.
Oh,
yeah.
well, men allow it.
No, I'll give you the example. You can disprove force doctrine right now if you can prove that men or do not, on a fundamental level, have a monopoly on force and are stronger than women. Go ahead.
And-
Get the floor.
I have never argued that men are strong, or that rather men are not stronger than women. I have never argued that, and I made that very clear. That has nothing to do with men granting rights. Just like we already established, granting and enforcing are different things. So you have not drawn a logical conclusion from just because somebody's enforcing it, they are the same people who are granting it. In fact, we agreed on the opposite. So it is up to you to prove that that is somehow the same thing.
No. Wait. What are you saying? We agreed on the opposite. Explain.
We agreed that the king would be granting the right and the knights would be enforcing it. Those are different
And-
things.
And is he a man in this scenario?
In this scenario, sure, but it could just as well be a
Okay.
queen. The queen could be granting the rights and the queen's knights could be enforcing it.
Queen Mary
And-
did have a lot of power.
And how did matriarchs in power throughout history, did they have a bunch of Amazon women to enforce what they want, or did they have men to do it?
Sure. Even if it was all men that were using the physical force to enforce, that's fine. But we also agreed, that not all enforcement is physical, and women
Right.
can
Well-
enforce in the non-physical
let's
way.
stay on
and
this
enforcement
analogy.
is different from origin. I don't know how else.
Let's
This is
stay
going
on
in a
this
circle
point.
now.
Let's stay on this point.
Okay, go ahead.
So ultimately, then, even in the scenario you just pointed out, it would be men who are enforcing whatever the current agreed upon thing is.
They would be doing the physical enforcement part of it, but that's just as well as saying
Right.
people in uniform enforce things or people with short hair enforce things. We don't say people with short hair grant women rights.
Well, no,
or
that's
people
has
with
nothing to do with
short hair
it.
grant people with long hair rights.
That's
or
obfuscation and
or
has
people
nothing to
in
do with the
uniform
argument.
grant people without uniform rights. Just
just
because they
nonsense.
happen
I think
to
it's an
be
issue,
men that
Jen.
do the physical force, it doesn't. You're like arbitrarily picked a characteristic that is
Arbitrarily?
like fitting.
Sex?
Yeah, you arbitrarily picked a characteristic, and you were like, because these people happen to be this thing that somehow matters on some intrinsic level.
You already
means
agreed
therefore
men are
these particular
stronger.
People are granting.
How does this
women
logically
rights.
make any sense?
Your thing doesn't make sense because you already.
No,
you
you're
already
just saying that
conceded
without
all
any
of the
actual.
things
You're
that-
actually.
that
No, I'm
make
not.
this
I haven't.
fun.
You can
Okay,
say that all
sure.
you want, but you
Well,
haven't actually given an actual
Let me know
argument
when we can
logically to
close and I
prove
can
the
point it out.
opposite.
Okay, I'll point out all your concessions to you. That's fine.
Okay, go. Yeah,
We-
sure.
I mean, we could do closings if you guys want. We've been going
Who
for
wants cake?
3 hours, so you could do closings if you want.
I'm good. I'm having fun. This is great. I don't care. I can go all night.
Go all night.
I was thinking about-
What happened to the whiskey's affecting me now? that was.
I don't need whiskey to defeat her arguments.
Oh.
You, on the other hand, you're a fun interlocutor.
What?
You're a fun interlocutor.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear. I didn't hear the words.
I saw.
You're.
I did the same thing. I was like, "What? He's a funny."
What do you thought I said?
I had
A
no
thought you
idea.
said-
No.
I was like, you,
No, actually, no. I take it back. Yeah, you're a fun.
I,
You're a
I
Funyun.
thought you
I'm a
said he's a
Funyun.
Funyun
That's what
locker, and I'm like, a
Funyun
Funyun
locker.
locker. I
I
don't know
all
what
my
that
years,
is.
Mo.
I've never heard anybody tell me that.
You're a Funyun locker. Actually, I already used that. You're a Funyun locker. I really enjoyed
Is
this.
that the sequel to Hurt Locker? Anyway, so yeah, I don't mind doing closings. So I can just sing as I did the one. I can just start it off. I think we
Wouldn't it
pretty
be
much.
the other way around.
Oh, you want to do it the other way around?
We could go backwards. We could
Alright.
go backwards. Have
Usually
Mo go
it's
first, and
The opposite, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't care. Well, I had a blast. This was awesome. This was a lot of fun. Rix. Well, also let me say, I don't take any of this personally. I don't mean anything. Personally offense. I appreciate everyone being here. Abe, thank you for putting this on. This was a whole lot of fun. I had a great time. So once again, I don't take this personal. This is just the arguments. I'm attacking the arguments. After this, we can all be, buddies or friends or whatever. Rex, great exchange. Def not gonna beat you up. You had. I'm looking forward to you figuring things out a little more concretely, so we can maybe. I was hoping to have a little more of a discussion with you, but once you get to that point, we can maybe have that discussion. But basically, yeah, every example we talked about, laws, courts, social norms, even the most basic protections. I think I've demonstrated tonight that speaking in the legal, visceral, real world examples, that all of them function when there's some mechanism of enforcement behind them. If not, it just remains this concept or a moral claim or whatever you want to have it. You can call enforcement whatever you want, governments, institutions, social pressure. Not all force is violent, but all of it reduces to the same thing, force. That's actually what governs behavior, not abstract ideas of rights, right? Is a right in the room with you right now? Did one fly over my head? Copper, you were right? I don't know, right? It's this idea of it's these abstract thing, and until it becomes real and enforceable, then that's when it becomes real. It other than that, it just remains in the mind, essentially. So when you strip everything else away, philosophy, the theology, the language, you're left with a simple truth. Rights don't exist as a real thing in the world. What exists is really force. And that's all I have to say on it. And I think I've demonstrated that, at least on the physical plane. Now, I do recognize the moral claim, and I do give it validity. And I agree with a lot of what Rex said. But that's it. Thank you for having me.
right. Thank you, Mo.
Thank you. I suppose I was in the middle. All right. So I do think we had a lot of concessions here, and sure, they can be waved away as don't matter in the moment. But when you do add it all up, in the beginning, I mentioned how there are three main things that are argued for force doctrine to be true. The monopoly on force. I think I've shown that monopoly on force is not exclusively in control of men. Women do have control of force as well, especially if I was actually not expecting the concession of force being past physical, because this is something that Wilson does not let go like that. So that was actually a freebie for me, that force is beyond simply what is physically done to somebody, and that opens up a whole realm of possibilities for women to be involved in enforcement, and would in fact they are involved in enforcement. So saying that because men enforce things, therefore they grant it, is already a disconnect, because as I demonstrated with the king/queen situation, the king/queen would be granting it and they would be sending somebody else to enforce it. That shows the difference between granting and enforcing. Just because somebody enforces something does not mean they grant it. Therefore, even if it was only men that exclusively enforce things, it still would not mean that they grant rights. And again, that was a total freebie. I appreciate that. Again, the force being the foundation of all things. We just agreed that it's not just physical, and I'm okay with opening up that. So that particular one, I started with the concept that, like, okay, physical force isn't the foundation of everything, and if we open it up to like enforcement, that's kind of null. Men as a unified category one, I think that one I've hammered in kind of earlier in the conversation, but like I was saying, men don't act as men. They act based on religion. They act based on their politics. So even in the examples in Iran and Afghanistan and all these places, it's they have disagreements based on political or religious or some other belief, and they organize as such. They don't organize because, okay, we're all men, let's all get together and do men stuff. They organize based on whatever like religious political thing they have going on against the other religious political things they have going on. It's saying that people collectivize as men or collectivize as women is simply not how human beings work. We don't see that happening in the world anywhere. Anywhere we even have enforcement of regardless of what type, if it's physical or not physical, of like even women being oppressed, like in Afghanistan and places like that, those things also involve other women doing the enforcing and doing the the headwear and everything, teaching the younger generations the same kind of morals and traditions. All of those things support society and support structure, support government, and it's not like, oh, men out there are like whipping them every single one into submission. That's simply not the case. So I think we have gotten the concession for basically every point. So that's quite interesting. I do intend to go over this at some point in the future, that where I could go like in more detail and really like take my time with everything. So I guess look forward to that. But it is late, so I'm cool with stopping there. I appreciate the conversation. This went way better than I thought it would.
Yeah. I may have a few questions for you guys through donations before we all take off, if that's
Oh yes,
possible.
I interrupted Rex. You had a question for me that sorry. So if you want to address that
And he
with
has
that
his
too, yeah.
closing
How
as
about
well.
I do the closing and then we'll
Yep.
do the questions afterward.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
All right. So I would say thank you, Mo Rebuttal, for coming to this debate. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Definitely Not Whatever. Also a pleasure to have you at this discussion. Thank you for Abe Dinkus for graciously having us over. You have been a wonderful moderator. You are fair and level-headed, and I mean, this is a great sort of segment that you got going on. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. So, but in summary, from my argument, I would say that I think it's clear that the enforcement of a law is dependent and contingent upon the moral law existing transcendentally from God to us, being made in God's image. But what I will say is this. God does have property rights absolutely over us. God has no duties to us, and we have no rights before God. And so because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, we have offended all of an infinite God, and we deserve all of an infinite punishment, which is hell, which is justice, which would be just. He is the enforcement, and he is the moral standard in himself, being the cornerstone of reality. He does enforce his own law because he owns everything. He is the Lord and master of all. And so as we stand condemned before all of a holy God, knowing that we fully deserve every single bit of punishment that we have earned, we know also that God is merciful, and he's demonstrated that mercy by sending his son, the Lord Jesus Christ, who is fully God and fully man, to die in our place on the cross, not just receiving a physical punishment, but also a spiritual punishment and the satisfaction of the wrath of God being poured out upon him for our sin. And so as a result of that, we know that God calls you not only just to know that this exists and know that this is true, but also that we have a duty towards God as human beings to turn. And if he invites us to be forgiven from him, he has a right to deny us that. But of his free will, he has decided to give us a chance at mercy. And so he has told us, come and believe only on the sacrifice of God. You can earn nothing before God. But God does offer mercy for that. And my point in saying that is this, that if you turn to God and you recognize the sins are all against God, he will change your heart. He will give you a new life. He will give you a new desires. And then you can see more rightly the fact that we have wronged God. We have wronged our fellow man. We have thought ill of God. We have thought ill of each other, spoken ill of each other. And that should impact us in our conscience, which is the law of God written on our hearts. We shouldn't stifle our conscience. We should recognize this, even when it comes, if not especially when it comes to government and how we recognize the rights of other people, and how when we vote, when we run for office, we need to keep in mind who the God of government is. We need to keep in mind who the God of rights is, who the God of people is. And that's how we live our life. And whatever we do, whether we eat or drink, which we are free to eat and drink as we will, whether we marry or do not marry, we do it all for the glory of God. For he is worthy, and it is his right to tell us what to do, and it is our duty to respond to those things.
Very good. Thank you, Reexamination.
So
Okay.
the question from my chat, Mo, was, do you have... Let me see if I can get it. Do you have the... gosh, where is that? Do you have the right to your beliefs regardless of force? Meaning, like, if somebody tried to force you or to believe in something else, whether or not they were successful or not, would that be a violation of your rights to either try and brainwash you or force you to believe in something else? Does that violate you in any way?
So the question is, if someone brainwashed me, or do I have the right to my own mind? Is that
the way they phrase it was, does Mo have a right to his beliefs regardless of force? That was the phraseology.
So, okay, so two parts to answer this. One, intrinsically, made in the image of God. God bestowed free will upon me. I have the right to my own thoughts, and you'd say that, right? Like under like a God-given right. But if the government came in and mind wiped me, my rights wouldn't exist to stop that in a legal situation. So it's separating the two, and we actually went over this where between me and you, we're basically talking essentially on two different planes of rights. You're saying that your moral God-given rights versus when I'm talking about rights, I'm referring to the legal system, force, enforcement, and which is essentially that's what it distills down to, is just force. So you could say that I could claim that I have the right based under God's moral judgment, but that's not going to stop the government coming in and mind wiping me if they want to.
Okay. All right. So I have two primary questions from my chat. The first is Defnot. If social pressure is not acknowledged or followed, what are the escalation steps for force?
I mean, I understand that eventually you do get to like fines, and I understand that eventually you do have to use physical force. However, if you look at how people function, people generally want to avoid physical conflict, just like most animals, because in physical conflict, you're always risking yourself and your own life. So whenever people want to survive, which most do, they try to get into as little conflict as possible, which is why nonviolent resolution is like 99% of the time the case. So when people do any sort of enforcement, 99% of the time it is not a violent physical thing. The less than 1% when it does get violent or physical. I'm not saying force isn't completely unnecessary or isn't useful, but the whole like everything reduces to force. Like sure, if you take away everything real, at some point everything reduces to anything. If I take away anything meaningful from any particular concept, I can reduce it to whatever I want, but that would require me taking away all the meaningful things. So I hope that helps.
Okay. And Mo, if the Bible says thou shalt not steal, does that indicate you have a right to own things?
If the Bible says thou shalt not steal, do you have the right to own things? I would say that is a moral claim under God's moral structure of rights. So once again, that would be a separate thing than a government and enforcement mechanism. So once again, if I claim I have a moral right to something conceptually under God's authority, that's good, that's great, and I could be very much right in that regard. But if the government infringes upon that, then realistically, I don't have a right to property.
So we do have rights, but they can get violated. Okay, thank you.
I never
Round 8.
Yeah, I never made a claim that the rights couldn't, conceptual rights couldn't be violated. My claim is that ultimately it's going to come down to force. I've been making that claim all night.
Their assertion, yeah, you have been.
Yeah, well, I've demonstrated and proven it, but you don't
No,
have
you haven't, but okay.
you don't have a proper rebuttal, and I'm sure you'll make plenty of videos on this, but with straw man arguments,
get to
but
them.
not my arguments.
I mean,
I'm sure you
can
will.
wait
We
all of
can-
your concessions as strawman arguments. That's fine, but that's kind of embarrassing for you.
If
We
you
will all
represent
have
my
fun.
argument in an unfair way, then yes, it's a straw man.
I don't see how any of that was unfair when you conceded to everything. And
You've
I
done
just
it all
pointed
night.
out-
You've injected things that I haven't said and said things and made these straw man arguments
Well,
all
wait,
night.
Let's
can-
sing
you
a
can
Because
make a
you-
video
I
on it,
think-
and you can let me know
You
exactly.
don't
what
actually
you
have
want.
any look. Okay, if you want to get down to it, you actually don't even have a position to even defend. So
I don't
you're
need
just
a
sitting here throwing out
position to point out How
questions.
yours doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Oh,
I
glorified
think-
fence sitter. Great.
I think these two need a real debate, like a structured, timed debate in the future.
She'll
That's
never
what I
answer
You
any
think.
should make a
questions.
video and point out.
She'll
never
how
answer any
I've been
questions.
doing strawmans because if we do any sort of debate and I point out concessions and how they kind of
You straw man
make the whole
Andrew
thing
all the
fall apart.
time.
and then every time that it's a concession, he just waves it away as strawman without explaining.
No,
exactly
because
why.
you
That's kind of
purposefully
useless to even try to
misinterpret what
debate.
I'm saying to fit what you think you want me to say in order to defeat that
I'm sorry.
argument.
Okay, I mean, I don't know what else to say here. I've used your own words, and if you want to wave it away as strawman, that's
No,
that's
you
on Like,
haven't.
I can't do
No,
anything
you
about
haven't.
that.
I said people with guns enforce rights, and then you took it
I'm-
to so women that's
think-
roll the tape back.
I think this is a
I never said
framework
women.
breakdown because I think there's a general versus specific, and there's a whole bunch of stuff happening here that's
Yeah, she wants to
hilarious when it
like
comes to
filibuster and talk in
communication.
random nonsense.
Well,
Okay, sure.
I think it's how you see the world is the difference.
Have you actually answered any question I've given you directly all night? No.
Sure, I have. I said plenty.
No,
of
you
questions.
can.
What are
You
talking about?
deny the
Does that one count?
It's how you
analogies.
see-
Does that one
it's
count?
totally how you-
Analogies don't. Sure, we can. You can say that one, but she's fine.
Okay. I mean, I understand you're taking this kind of.
I don't
hard,
like
so
your.
I'm
I
gonna
love.
let
I
you
love. By the way, you
go
gave me
off.
shit about the Superman analogy, but then you had the back and forth with Regism. You're like, well, yeah, anything's logically possible. I guess Superman isn't though. Okay, apparently, right?
Superman is logically possible. I just told you how it wasn't relevant to reality. A lot of things
Yeah,
are
okay,
logically
all right.
possible, but they're not practically speaking possible
Yeah,
at all.
you're a contradiction machine. Holy
That's
shit!
not a contradiction. Basically, anything is logically possible, including Superman. But it's
So then,
not
why can't
applicable
you
to
engage in the
reality.
analogy without like saying it doesn't apply? That doesn't
Because
apply. It's not reality.
applicable to reality.
Oh, okay. And then I
Anything
gave you
is
the
logically
king,
possible,
and you didn't like
including
that.
Green aliens that can come down and put things in your butt. Does that mean they grant you butt rights?
Give me an
I
analogy
understand you're
around
taking
that,
this
and I'll
hard, so I'm
contend
gonna
with
let
it.
you go. I'm
Butt
not gonna fight with
rights.
you over this.
Give me an analogy
what?
around that, and I'll talk about green
Listen,
aliens and butts all you
listen.
want.
Listen, we all have butt rights, okay? calm
I hope
down.
so.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, and
that's a
yeah,
subcategory.
I don't
of,
want I don't want anybody messing with my
self-defense.
butt.
Thank you. I agree. Butt rights.
I reserve the right to not be butt proved. Yes,
We learned that. Listen, tonight we learned we have butt rights, and
that's
Funyun
right.
lockers
We
are
can
a
all agree
thing.
on that.
Okay.
Funyun lockers. Yes, I'm going to use that. That's mine now. TMO. It was accident.
Thank you guys so much for coming out and doing this. I know they get contentious,
fine.
but it was fun. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
That was fun. Thanks, guys. Enjoyed it.
Yes. Do
God
you guys want
bless.
to tell them where they can find you? All of that before you take off for the
Yeah,
evening?
sure. Yeah, Mo Rebuttal. It's the same handle and everything. Discord, YouTube, X. And once again, thanks for putting this on. Thanks for everybody showing up. Yeah, and God bless. And Christ is God. I'll see you guys next time.
Amen. So I'm at Reexamination Show on YouTube. I believe it's Examination Show on X, and probably Reexamination Show on Rumble as well. I believe I finally actually get my own username at Discord. If I'm not, I got a few of them out there. But yeah, so you can subscribe to the channel, like my videos, and check out for more. I'm kind of similar to Def Nut in the fact that I'm in my own corner. She's in her own corner, and and Mo is Mo definitely has a lot of allies, I would say, in the what I would call within the crucible. It is like the crucifery cabbage flower sphere. No. The Crucible Sphere. But yeah, if you definitely want alternative takes from a Christian perspective, more of a Protestant perspective, I'll be your guy.
Good stuff.
I suppose I'll go. I'm at definitely not whatever. Don't judge the username. I'm not good at making those up. So that's on YouTube.